fugitives are now being picked up almost daily.
We've made important progress. We have been able to decapitate a second tier of leadership within al-Qaeda.
Much of that progress is a result of this month's arrest of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, one of al-Qaeda's inner circle. On the other hand, a war with Iraq is widely seen as likely to generate more terrorism.
A war in Iraq with large civilian casualties will alienate more youngsters in the Arab world and make them a fertile recruiting ground for radical groups like al-Jihad and al-Qaeda.
And there could be more immediate danger.
If a terrorist group can pull off an attack here, they will certainly try it as soon as the war starts.
As the war gets closer, more and more moderate Muslims are speaking out. A statement released at Cairo's ancient Al-Azhar University says if U.S. forces enter Iraq, jihad, or struggle, becomes an Islamic obligation on every male and female Muslim. The prospect of war appears to be already breeding new risks for the U.S. Barry Saraf, ABC News, Washington.
Not to use his veto at a summit in the Azores, President Bush set today as the deadline for UN action. Evacuation orders have been issued for family members of U.S. government employees and non-essential personnel in 3 countries. They've been told to leave Israel, Syria, and Kuwait immediately. And Chief UN Weapons Inspector Hans Blix is considering an invitation to go back to Baghdad. He says the situation in Iraq now is threatening. Blix is also considering whether to evacuate inspectors from Iraq.
Here's Derek McGinty.
Good morning. President Bush is vowing to make good on his ultimatum to Saddam Hussein. After a summit with the leaders of Britain and Spain, he said today is the moment of truth and warned Iraq will be disarmed even without UN approval. ABC's Sonia Crawford is in Washington. And Sonia, we've heard the phrase many times so far, but it seems that now time is really running out.
That's right, Derek. Diplomacy ends today. By the end of the day, we will know where the UN Security Council is on this Iraq issue, either by vote or by the withdrawal of that second UN resolution.
President Bush and his 2 closest allies on the Security Council will spend today working the phones, trying to convince undecided countries and those threatening vetoes that it's in the best interest of the UN as an organization and the world as a whole to take military action against Iraq.
Many nations have voiced a commitment to peace and security, and now they must demonstrate that commitment to peace and security in the only effective way, by supporting the immediate and unconditional disarmament of Saddam Hussein.
The truth is that without a credible ultimatum authorizing force in the event of non-compliance, then more discussion is just more delay.
But this morning, France maintains it can't accept any UN resolution with an ultimatum that authorizes war. French President Jacques Chirac's best offer? A 30-day deadline which the U.S. rejects out of hand. The Security Council meets this afternoon to discuss Iraq and hear from Chief Weapons Inspector Hans Blix, who has not yet ordered his people on the ground in Iraq to pull out.
We'll watch it hour by hour.
And even though Blix claims he didn't hear an ultimatum coming out of the summit in the Azores yesterday, Iraqi President Saddam Hussein has placed 3 trusted allies and one of his sons in charge of the country's defense. According to American sources, he's going into deep hiding beginning today.
Another sign of impending war, the State Department is pulling all non-essential diplomats and their families out of Kuwait, Israel, and Syria, and urging all Americans to leave Kuwait. Derek?
Sonia, thank you. ABC's Sonia Crawford joining us.
From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Dan Rather.
Good evening. The time for talk is running out. President Bush is about to deliver an ultimatum to Saddam Hussein. White House officials said tonight the president will give Saddam 48 hours, not 72, 48, to get out of Iraq or face a U.S.-led invasion. Iraqi officials say that won't happen. Saddam will not leave, they say. Earlier today, Britain and the U.S. gave up their bid to win new authorization for action against Iraq from the UN Security Council. They withdrew their new additional resolution rather than face defeat, clearing, it is their argument, the way for a military campaign without any new UN approval. This was over the strong protests of France and Germany. Secretary General Kofi Annan has now ordered UN weapons inspectors and other personnel out of Iraq. 250,000 American troops are poised to strike, most of them in northern Kuwait. As for the Iraqis, they are reportedly dispersing their best troops, hoping to ride out the first wave of air attacks, which could include as many as 600 cruise missiles. After that, they want to make the American march on Baghdad as costly as possible. We now take you live to the White House for the President's address.
My fellow citizens, events in Iraq have now reached the final days of decision. For more than a decade, the United States and other nations have pursued patient and honorable efforts to disarm the Iraqi regime without war. That regime pledged to reveal and destroy all its weapons of mass destruction as a condition for ending the Persian Gulf War in 1991. Since then, the world has engaged in 12 years of diplomacy. We have passed more than a dozen resolutions in the United Nations Security Council. We have sent hundreds of weapons inspectors to oversee the disarmament of Iraq. Our good faith has not been returned. The Iraqi regime has used diplomacy as a ploy to gain time and advantage. It has uniformly defied Security Council resolutions demanding full disarmament. Over the years, UN weapon inspectors have been threatened by Iraqi officials, electronically bugged, and systematically deceived. Peaceful efforts to disarm the Iraqi regime have failed again and again because we are not dealing with peaceful men. Intelligence gathered by this and other governments leaves no doubt that the Iraqi regime continues to possess and conceal some of the most lethal weapons ever devised. This regime has already used weapons of mass destruction against Iraq's neighbors and against Iraq's people. The regime has a history of reckless aggression in the Middle East. It has a deep hatred of America and our friends, and it has aided, trained, and harbored terrorists, including operatives of Al-Qaeda. The danger is clear. Using chemical, biological, or one-day nuclear weapons obtained with the help of Iraq, the terrorists could fulfill their stated ambitions and kill thousands or hundreds of thousands of innocent people in our country or any other. The United States and other nations did nothing to deserve or invite this threat, but we will do everything to defeat it. Instead of drifting along toward tragedy, we will set a course toward safety. Before the day of horror can come, before it is too late to act, this danger will be removed. The United States of America has the sovereign authority to use force in assuring its own national security. That duty falls to me as Commander-in-Chief. By the oath I have sworn, by the oath I will keep. Recognizing the threat to our country, the United States Congress voted overwhelmingly last year to support the use of force against Iraq. America tried to work with the United Nations to address this threat because we wanted to resolve the issue peacefully. We believe in the mission of the United Nations. One reason the UN was founded after the Second World War was to confront aggressive dictators actively and early before they can attack the innocent and destroy the peace. In the case of Iraq, the Security Council did act in the early 1990s. Under resolutions 678 and 687, both still in effect, the United States and our allies are authorized to use force in ridding Iraq of weapons of mass destruction. This is not a question of authority. It is a question of will. Last September, I went to the UN General Assembly and urged the nations of the world to unite and bring an end to this danger. On November 8th, the Security Council unanimously passed Resolution 1441, finding Iraq in material breach of its obligations and vowing serious consequences if Iraq did not fully and immediately disarm. Today, no nation can possibly claim that Iraq has disarmed, and it will not disarm so long as Saddam Hussein holds power. For the last 4.5 months, the United States and our allies have worked within the Security Council to enforce that council's long-standing demands. Yet some permanent members of the Security Council have publicly announced that they will veto any resolution that compels the disarmament of Iraq. These governments share our assessment of the danger, but not our resolve to meet it. Many nations, however, do have the resolve and fortitude to act against this threat to peace. And a broad coalition is now gathering to enforce the just demands of the world. The United Nations Security Council has not lived up to its responsibilities, so we will rise to ours. In recent days, some governments in the Middle East have been doing their part. They have delivered public and private messages urging the dictator to leave Iraq so that disarmament can proceed peacefully. He has thus far refused. All the decades of deceit and cruelty have now reached an end. Saddam Hussein and his sons must leave Iraq within 48 hours. Their refusal to do so will result in military conflict, commenced at a time of our choosing. For their own safety, all foreign nationals, including journalists and inspectors, should leave Iraq immediately. Many Iraqis can hear me tonight in a translated radio broadcast, and I have a message for them. If we must begin a military campaign, it will be directed against the lawless men who rule your country, and not against you. As our coalition takes away their power, we will deliver the food and medicine you need. We will tear down the apparatus of terror, and we will help you to build a new Iraq that is prosperous and free. In a free Iraq, there will be no more wars of aggression against your neighbors, no more poison factories, no more executions of dissidents, no more torture chambers and rape rooms. The tyrant will soon be gone. The day of your liberation is near. It is too late for Saddam Hussein to remain in power. It is not too late for the Iraqi military to act with honor and protect your country by permitting the peaceful entry of coalition forces to eliminate weapons of mass destruction. Our forces will give Iraqi military units clear instructions on actions they can take to avoid being attacked and destroyed. I urge every member of the Iraqi military and intelligence services, if war comes, do not fight for a dying regime that is not worth your own life. And all Iraqi military and civilian personnel should listen carefully to this warning. In any conflict, your fate will depend on your actions. Do not destroy oil wells, a source of wealth that belongs to the Iraqi people. Do not obey any command to use weapons of mass destruction against anyone, including the Iraqi people. War crimes will be prosecuted. War criminals will be punished. And it will be no defense to say, I was just following orders. Should Saddam Hussein choose confrontation, the American people can know that every measure has been taken to avoid war, and every measure will be taken to win it. Americans understand the costs of conflict because we have paid them in the past. War has no certainty except the certainty of sacrifice. Yet the only way to reduce the harm and duration of war is to apply the full force and might of our military, and we are prepared to do so. If Saddam Hussein attempts to cling to power, he will remain a deadly foe until the end. In desperation, he and terrorist groups might try to conduct terrorist operations against the American people and our friends. These attacks are not inevitable. They are, however, possible. And this very fact underscores the reason we cannot live under the threat of blackmail. The terrorist threat to America and the world will be diminished the moment that Saddam Hussein is disarmed. Our government is on heightened watch against these dangers. Just as we are preparing to ensure victory in Iraq, we are taking further actions to protect our homeland. In recent days, American authorities have expelled from the country certain individuals with ties to Iraqi intelligence services. Among other measures, I have directed additional security at our airports and increased Coast Guard patrols of major seaports. The Department of Homeland Security is working closely with the nation's governors to increase armed security at critical facilities across America. Should enemies strike our country, they would be attempting to shift our attention with panic and weaken our morale with fear. In this, they would fail. No act of theirs can alter the course or shake the resolve of this country. We are a peaceful people, yet we're not a fragile people, and we will not be intimidated by thugs and killers. If our enemies dare to strike us, they and all who have aided them will face fearful consequences. We are now acting because the risks of inaction would be far greater. In 1 year or 5 years, the power of Iraq to inflict harm on all free nations would be multiplied many times over. With these capabilities, Saddam Hussein and his terrorist allies could choose the moment of deadly conflict when they are strongest. We choose to meet that threat now, where it arises, before it can appear suddenly in our skies and cities. The cause of peace requires all free nations to recognize new and undeniable realities. In the 20th century, some chose to appease murderous dictators whose threats were allowed to grow into genocide and global war. In this century, when evil men plot chemical, biological, and nuclear terror, a policy of appeasement could bring destruction of a kind never before seen on this earth. Terrorists and terrorist states do not reveal these threats with fair notice in formal declarations. And responding to such enemies only after they have struck first is not self-defense, it is suicide. The security of the world requires disarming Saddam Hussein now. As we enforce the just demands of the world, we will also honor the deepest commitments of our country. Unlike Saddam Hussein, we believe the Iraqi people are deserving and capable of human liberty. And when the dictator has departed, they can set an example to all the Middle East of a vital and peaceful and self-governing nation. The United States, with other countries, will work to advance liberty and peace in that region. Our goal will not be achieved overnight, but it can come over time. The power and appeal of human liberty is felt in every life and every land. And the greatest power of freedom is to overcome hatred and violence and turn the creative gifts of men and women to the pursuits of peace. That is the future we choose. Free nations have a duty to defend our people by uniting against the violent. And tonight, as we have done before, America and our allies accept that responsibility. Good night, and may God continue to bless America.
President Bush speaking live from the White House to the nation and the world, laying down a 48-hour, not 72 hours, 48-hour deadline for Saddam Hussein to leave Iraq.
Yet another spring-like day cooking out there this morning. Welcome to American Morning. It's Tuesday, March 18th. Glad to have you with us this morning. As you know, President Bush gave Saddam Hussein and his sons 48 hours to get out of Iraq last night during a national address. A little more than 12 hours now have gone by, and this morning one of his sons dismissed the president's ultimatum. Uday Hussein says President Bush is, quote, unstable, and that he is the one that should leave power. Let's check in with Bill Hemmer, who's standing by in Kuwait City. Any reaction there to the president's ultimatum last night?
Yeah, a whole lot of reaction, Paul. And the Kuwaitis we talked to, almost to a person that we see on the street, say that's the right thing to do. And so many people here are optimistic that the days of Saddam Hussein can be over at some time very soon. They say in order for this country, Kuwait, to prosper and move into the future, they say they have to get rid of the situation to the north, that situation being Saddam Hussein. Paula, yesterday at this time, we had planned to be out in the desert with the U.S. military, but it was about this time yesterday when they called and canceled everything that we had arranged here. And it was quite evident hours later when the ultimatum came down from the White House that things right now are on a very quick pace toward the strong possibility that military conflict is soon at hand. However, out in those camps right now, we do have a live camera. In a few moments here, we're going to talk with a colonel of the 101st Airborne Division. How concerned are they right now about the possibility that Iraq may hit U.S. troops first before any military conflict is engaged? And also, we know that U.S. men and women are required to carry a gas mask on their hip 24 hours a day. Also getting reports today that some right now have their chemical and biological suits at the ready as well. We'll have that interview for you in a couple of minutes here from the Kuwaiti desert. Paula?
Yet, as you showed us in the last hour, at the same time, you had jet skiers having one heck of a time out there this morning, not far from where you're sitting now.
Yeah, just behind me, in fact, Arabian Gulf Road is a main thoroughfare here in Kuwait City. It's 6 lanes across, and on the other side of that, you get to the water. It is a very interesting juxtaposition, Paula, how we can literally be right near the front lines of a military conflict within days right here and still see life pretty much normal here in Kuwait City. A strong testament to the amount of safety and security Kuwaitis feel right now about their own country and their people.
Thanks, Bill. We'll see you a little bit later on in this half hour. In the meantime, let's check in with Leon Harris, who's standing by at CNN Center. Good morning, Leon.
Good morning, Paula. Good morning, folks at home. Here now is our news alert. British Prime Minister Tony Blair made his case for using force against Iraq before the House of Commons this morning, and the Prime Minister said that weakness in the face of a tyrant does not produce peace, but conflict.
The only persuasive power to which he responds is 250,000 Allied troops on his doorstep.
Standby in Kuwait. He safely traveled there. Happy to see you back on the ground on terra firma now, safe and sound. Good morning, Bill.
Hey, Paula, thanks. And I want to show our viewers a small slice of life that we found earlier today in Kuwait City. It's now the evening, right around 5 o'clock. Rush hour traffic is kicking out. But earlier today, check out the morning rush hour here in Kuwait City. It was literally bumper to bumper on those busy, clogged downtown streets. It does not look like a country right now that is perched on the precipice of war. Kuwaitis will tell you that they're going about their lives in a very normal way because they feel a sense of security. 120,000 U.S. troops, another 20,000 on the British side, now stationed in this country alone. Now, that does not mean that they are not taking anything for granted here. I'll show you a slice of the security detail that has been now perched and placed at various thoroughfares, the main intersections in downtown Kuwait City. You find these armored personnel carriers with Kuwaiti Army soldiers manning machine guns. This happens 24 hours a day. The presence is seen just about everywhere, and it's also seen outside of our hotels, where many of the Westerners and Western journalists now stay here in Kuwait City. The presence is here. The the tension is higher, but nowhere near a fever pitch, something that's quite obvious that we noticed here on the streets of Kuwait City today. In addition to this, outside of the city, getting reports hours ago, Highway 80, which is the main thoroughfare, the main highway that runs north to Iraq, several hours ago, eyewitnesses spotting dozens of convoys, they say hundreds of military vehicles on the move, going north to Iraq. And we got that word again several hours ago. We will watch everything for you here in Kuwait, but for now, let's get back to New York and more with Paula. See you in a couple minutes, Paula.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. A few other developments from all over the world, all pertaining to Iraq. British Prime Minister Tony Blair is facing a tough sales job at home as he tries to get his own ruling party to back a war against Iraq. 3 members of his government have already resigned in protest. And there is a movement in the Turkish parliament to support the U.S. war effort. It remains to be seen if that will translate into permission for U.S. troops and military planes to travel through Turkey on their way to Iraq. And some ominous precautions being taken in Israel. Citizens there are being told to prepare sealed rooms in their homes to provide safety in the event of a chemical attack.
Good morning, Paula. Well, we've just seen President Saddam Hussein in military uniform meeting with his top political leaders, the leaders of the Revolutionary Command Council, the leaders of the Ba'ath Party, denouncing President Bush's ultimatum that he should leave, saying that this was a debased and reckless assessment and request, and Iraq was denouncing it. Also saying that it was clear that the United States was trying to win this, get victory, without having to actually fight. And he said that showed how isolated and how defeated President Bush was already. We've also heard today from Uday Saddam Hussein, President Saddam Hussein's elder son, saying that it was President Bush and his family that should step down from power, also saying that anyone that attacked Iraq would lament the day that they began such an attack. Very strong language coming this day, Paula.
Give us an idea of how local residents are reacting to the threat of war this morning.
Shops are boarding up, storekeepers have taken their stores out. We see some people on the road here, their vehicles loaded up with family possessions, likely heading out of the city. We see fewer vehicles on the road in the neighborhoods around Baghdad. There are some 5 million people living here, many people staying at home in their neighborhoods. The expectations are very much there that war is imminent. It's not only the expectations, there's a great deal of fear. We're also told today, government officials say that there will be big demonstrations across Iraq beginning right about this time. And also local television here, the station run by President Saddam Hussein's elder son, Uday Saddam Hussein, has been showing pictures of people joining up to his Fedayeen or Martyrs Brigade. These people, we're told, were seen joining up at dawn this morning.
As the likelihood of war climbs in Iraq, so does the threat of terrorism in the United States. The government raised the nationwide terror alert to its second highest level just moments after President Bush delivered an ultimatum to Saddam Hussein last night: a flight to exile or a fight for survival. In Iraq, the countdown to war and a deadline that is now less than 34 hours away. A plane carrying United Nations weapons inspectors takes off from Saddam International Airport as the clock ticks down. And it is now 10 a.m. in the east, 7 a.m. in the west. Morning, folks. I'm Leon Harris.
And I'm Carol Costello in for Darren Kagan, because Darren Kagan is on assignment, and we have her live now from Kuwait. Hello, Darren.
It's about time.
Greetings to you, Carol and Leon from Kuwait City. We arrived here about 22 hours ago. We have spent the last day getting situated, getting a feel for the country, getting a feel for the people, and of course, anticipating the war that might be coming very soon. Over the next couple hours, I'll be bringing you the sense of the mood here and also the preparations taking place here in Kuwait. Back to you.
All right, good deal.
10:32 Eastern Time. Homeland Security Director Tom Bridge. Let's listen.
Shield to increase security and readiness in the United States. This comprehensive national plan of action will help protect our citizens, our infrastructure, and very importantly, help deter those who plan further terrorist attack. Liberty Shield is a unified operation that integrates selected national protective measures with the involvement, and I might add, terrific support of federal, state, local, and private responders and authorities from around the country. Last night, we contacted all state governors, all state Homeland Security advisors, and leaders from other state, county, and local organizations, as well as the private sector, and reviewed these measures with them. I specifically asked the nation's governors to deploy National Guard and other law enforcement personnel at critical locations around their respective states. Now, Operation Liberty Shield focuses on the following imperatives. We will increase security at our borders. There will be more Coast Guard air and sea patrols off our shores and in our ports, more escorts of passenger ships, and hundreds of more agents and resources on the border. We will strengthen security for our transportation systems. There will be more security at airports and rail facilities around the country. Amtrak and other private railroad companies will implement security measures to protect passengers and hazardous cargo. New flight restrictions have temporarily been put in place over certain U.S. cities. We will continue measures to disrupt threats to our nation. The FBI, the Department of Justice, and the Department of Homeland Security are working closely to identify and stop those who would facilitate terrorist activity through fundraising, logistical support, and recruitment. We will protect our critical infrastructure. There will be increased Coast Guard patrols near our key petroleum and chemical facilities and more security at facilities handling radioactive materials. We will continue to monitor the internet for signs of a potential terrorist attack, cyber terrorism, hacking, and state-sponsored information warfare. And the Department of Treasury has taken steps to protect our financial network and payment systems. We will increase disease surveillance and food security. The Department of Health and Human Services has alerted state and local health departments, hospitals, and medical care providers to report any unusual disease or disease patterns. There will be greater inspection of imported food. The Department of Agriculture has alerted employees and representatives throughout the food and agricultural community to take extra precautions to monitor feedlots, stockyards, processing plants, import and storage areas. And finally, our response and recovery teams and resources throughout our nation are mobilized, in position, and ready. Now, we have taken these actions because intelligence reporting indicates that while al-Qaeda and those sympathetic to their cause are still a principal threat, the principal threat, Iraqi state agents, Iraqi surrogate groups, other regional extremist organizations, and ad hoc groups or disgruntled individuals may use this time period to conduct terrorist attacks against the United States in our interest, either here or abroad. The increase in the threat level is a signal to law enforcement, government officials at all levels, and representatives of the private sector to implement specific protective measures, just as they have done on 2 previous occasions. In response to the question of individual Americans, what do I do? First and foremost, again, we encourage you to be informed. Some good sources of information to learn what emergency precautions you can take are the ready.gov website. Now, in addition, your support and participation in reporting potential threats or suspicious activities to federal, state, or local law enforcement authorities adds significantly to our defense. Lastly, during this period of heightened alert, there is bound to be misinformation. Don't react to rumors. We will strive to get the facts out as soon as we can. Let me close by saying, your federal government is ready. Professionals at all levels are ready. Those in your states and in your communities and those in the private sector. And because of this very comprehensive, very coordinated effort, America is ready. Thank you very much. Yes?
Can you tell us more about the detentions of asylum seekers? How many do you think will be detained in how many countries, and how long do you expect them to be?
The detention of asylum seekers is basically predicated on one basic notion. We just want to make sure that those who are seeking asylum, number one, are who they say they are, and two, are legitimately seeking refuge in our country because of political repression at home, not because they choose to cause us harm or bring destruction to our shores. So, again, the detention will be constructed around that purpose. Yes.
Let's go immediately to the White House. The press secretary, Ari Fleischer, speaking.
Of good U.S.-China relations for the advancement of bilateral interests and international peace and stability. The President shared views on Iraq and North Korea. President Bush expressed appreciation for Beijing's efforts to help resolve the North Korean issue peacefully. President Bush also reiterated his administration's commitment to a one-China policy. The President then had his intelligence briefing, FBI briefing, had additional meetings, and has no public events on his schedule today. I'm happy to take your questions. Campbell?
Can we get your reaction to some of the comments that have been coming from the Hill? Senator Daschle saying he's, quote, saddened that this president failed so miserably at diplomacy that we are now forced to war.
Of course, members of Congress, including Senator Daschle, are well within their rights to express their opinions. If you take a look at what Senator Daschle has said about the inevitability of using force in 1998 And if you take a look at what Senator Daschle said about the importance of raising the rhetoric to a higher level and not politicizing the rhetoric, I find his statement to be inconsistent, but perhaps he has a better explanation.
But do you believe he is politicizing this, that no one has a right at this time to criticize the president?
No, I just said the opposite. Rights of every member of Congress to say what they think, to express their opinions. He certainly is well within his rights to express his opinions. It just strikes me as inconsistent with previously things he has said.
Can I also ask you about something Senator John McCain said on the floor this morning, that he would not support any tax cuts or spending increases not related to improving the nation's defenses. The president hasn't yet talked about cost at all with the American people. Again, we're standing on the brink. And he's still proposing a massive tax cut. At what point is he going to explain to people what this is going to cost the country in terms of the economy?
Well, Congress is just beginning the whole process of reviewing the budget, and all of this will become a part of that. If the event that it does lead to hostilities, the administration would send up a supplemental appropriation bill to the Congress, and so Congress will then have at its disposal all the relevant facts and figures to make the determinations for their budget issues as the year proceeds. In all cases, the president, as he has stressed repeatedly, is focused on and urges Congress to continue to focus on domestic needs, whether there is war or whether there is peace. And those domestic needs include providing economic growth so that if there is war, when the war is over, our military has jobs to come home to. And a part of that is passing the economic package. Ron?
President Putin condemned the military action in Iraq and spoke of it possibly hurting relations. At the same time, the Russian parliament pulled down a vote on the nuclear arms treaty. China's condemning the president's march to war. Did either one of these divisions come up in this conversation? Did he try to explain why he's doing what he's doing?
The two openly acknowledge that they don't see eye to eye on whether or not force should be used to disarm Saddam Hussein. They agree about threats in the region, but it's no secret that they don't see eye to eye on whether the use of force is a required remedy to make Saddam Hussein disarm. But the two of them in the phone call did stress to each other the importance of maintaining good U.S.-Russian relations, and both expressed confidence that would indeed happen.
Is Russia one of the countries the president was referring to when he said these countries share our belief about the threat with Iraq, but they don't share our resolve?
The president didn't specifically define who he was referring to, so I wouldn't define it for him. Bill?
When the president speaks to the nation at the beginning of hostilities, will he then, for the first time, talk about what he expects the conflict to cost in terms of lives and in terms of dollars?
You know, I'm just not going to be in the business of predicting future presidential remarks. If and when it gets to that point, the president would indicate something himself. I wouldn't predict every circumstance.
Do you think that the president will want to give the American public some indication? All we get...
I'm not saying he wouldn't. I'm just saying it's not my place today to do
Very
it for him.
sketchy, yet important military intelligence. Our Pentagon correspondent Barbara Starr is joining us live with an update. Barbara, hello.
Hello, Darren. Well, what we can tell you is military sources tell CNN that today the U.S. military began broadcasting new capitulation or surrender messages into Iraq. These messages are being broadcast to try and specifically provide instructions to Iraqi military units on how they might surrender and avoid being attacked by the U.S. military once it begins to move north towards Baghdad. Now, sources tell us that these messages include very specific instructions telling Iraqi military units to return to their barracks, to go home, leave their heavy weapons and vehicles parked, leave their vehicles parked in the same directions so they show no threat, put their heavy guns down, point their gun turrets down, and basically simply not come into any contact with U.S. military forces. The instructions, we are told, are specific enough that Iraqi military officers are being told they can maintain their sidearms for personal protection. Of course, the U.S. hopes that the Iraqi military will obey these instructions, because it would be a big help to U.S. forces as they move north in the days ahead, possibly not to be bogged down with hundreds of thousands of Iraqi POWs, because it is believed that the U.S. feels that the Iraqi military would surrender in large numbers like they did in 1991. The U.S. simply doesn't want to be bogged down with it, so they hope these people simply return to their barracks and pose no threat.
And a heightened terror alert. New concerns about guarding the home front from terrorists.
CNN's live from Kuwait, Baghdad, Jerusalem, the White House, New York, and other datelines around the globe.
It is 2 p.m. at the White House, 10 p.m. in Kuwait, where news is being made this Tuesday, March 18th, from CNN's World Headquarters in Atlanta. I'm Miles O'Brien, and you're watching live from We're Glad You're Here. Also this hour, what's the U.S. strategy for airstrikes going to be in the first hours of a war with Iraq? I'll go in depth with our CNN military analyst, General Don Shepard. Will explain how to take out a radar installation and surface-to-air missiles.
And live from Kuwait City, I'm Darren Kagan. We're also going to take you along the Army 7th Cavalry Division in Kuwait as they begin their march northward toward Iraq. But first, though, the latest on the showdown with Iraq. Saddam Hussein's #1 son says that if anybody goes into exile, it ought to be President Bush. Independently of his father, Uday Hussein today rejected Mr. Bush's demand that he, his brother, and the Iraqi president leave Iraq by 4 a.m. Baghdad time on Thursday. If U.S. troops attack, Uday says their wives and mothers will, quote, weep blood. Despite its refusal to even consider war in Iraq, France now says there are circumstances in which it could play a role. In an exclusive interview with CNN, the French ambassador to Washington says that if Iraq resorted to chemical or biological weapons, quote, it would change completely the situation for the French government. Officials in Paris stress the envoy was strictly speaking.
Welcome back. It's 17 minutes after the hour. America is on alert for terrorism now that war in Iraq is perhaps only hours away. The U.S. intelligence community believes that al-Qaeda is in the final stages of planning for large-scale attacks, possibly including chemical, biological, or radiological weapons. And the Department of Homeland Security has raised the threat level from elevated to high risk. And a little bit earlier this morning, I asked Homeland Security Secretary Tom Ridge about a report that says the U.S. is not adequately prepared for another terrorist attack.
What Americans hopefully understand is that every single day since September 11th, it hasn't just been the federal government, and the federal government has been working to improve security, but your governors and your mayors have, your local first responders, your law enforcement community, the private sector. Every single day there are actions taken in this country to help reduce the risk, to help reduce our vulnerability. Every single day there are actions taken to prevent a terrorist attack. Are we at the precise point where we can say we've got it all done? No, I'm not sure we'll ever be there, but we are far, far better prepared today than we were
Welcome back to American Morning. Glad to have you with us on this Wednesday morning. It is March 19th. On the eve of a potential war, the U.S. is bombing with paper. Nearly 2 million leaflets have been dropped in Iraq telling the military not to use weapons of mass destruction and promising innocent citizens the U.S. means them no harm. And cities across the United States are tightening security as this war approaches. President Bush has asked state governors to deploy National Guard troops or state police. In some cases, states are not doing that. They say they simply can't afford to. They do plan to do so, though, once military action gets underway. Let's go to Kuwait, where Bill Hemmer is standing by in the country's capital. Bill, is that sand still kicking up?
Yeah, yes, it is, Paul. We do anticipate it to continue into the night. The forecast says sometime after midnight tonight, it'll start to die down. The forecast is much better for tomorrow on Thursday when those winds die down. Meanwhile, the exodus continues out of Kuwait City. At the airport earlier today, we saw hundreds of people in line waiting to board their flights and leave this country. Now, last night, British Airways had said it would have its final flight out of Kuwait City. But earlier today, it chartered yet another flight to help some British citizens who no longer want to stay here, help them get an exit to leave. Kuwait Airways also saying now, Paula, it will move its operation, that's the national airline here, to Dubai sometime very soon, and we do anticipate the commercial airspace here to close shortly before any attack is launched. In addition, on the streets of Kuwait City, the National Guard now out in force For the first time in this conflict, 100 armored guard units with 1,000 National Guard troops out, and earlier on television, Deputy Prime Minister assuring Kuwaiti citizens that with the Allied force present here, in his words, he said, the U.S. is here to protect us. This is not like, he says, 1990 when this country was invaded by Iraq. Much more in a minute here, Paula.
Once again, CNN is number one for trust and experience. Americans choose CNN as the most credible news source. More than MSNBC or Fox News. More than any network, newspaper, or magazine. CNN is the most trusted name in news.
We're about 2 hours and 40 minutes away from President Bush's ultimatum to expire to Saddam Hussein. Stay with CNN. Coming up, Saddam Hussein in the final moments. What moves might he make? We'll speak to one of his biographers. That's coming up. We're live here in the Persian Gulf, and we're back in just a moment.
Will Saddam Hussein fight at the border or pull back to fight in the streets of Baghdad? Will he try to survive or attack with chemical weapons and try to go down as an Arab martyr? Only he knows for sure. But former CIA analyst Judy Yaffe says, one way or another, the man she's analyzed for so many years will try to kill a lot of Americans.
I think his theory is, I will do as much as I can to make it as ugly as possible for the Americans. I still believe that they have a Vietnam syndrome lingering, that once they see body bags, because they will, this is not Kuwait, this is Iraq, this is Baghdad, we Iraqis know how to fight in the streets, those Americans can't handle this.
Military analysts say the Iraqi leader may order dams breached to flood the Tigris and Euphrates river plains. Some believe he may force thousands of Iraqi civilians, women and children out onto the roads, creating a human buffer between the Americans and his forces. And then wait for U.S. troops in the streets of Baghdad and surrounding villages.
I think what is of most concern to commanders, though, is the hunkering down in the villages and neighborhoods themselves that will force house-to-house fighting.
And the goal, the strategy he seems to be
preparing to make his last stand. Bahrain today offered Saddam Hussein safe exile, but there are no signs he's prepared to accept the offer. Senior international correspondent Nick Robertson is one of the few television correspondents now left in Baghdad, and he has the report.
Closed shops and emptying streets. The sign Baghdad's residents now fully expect war. This shopping district, until a few days ago, bustling with busy shoppers. Now, most of the city's 5 million residents, it seems, are at home or have fled the capital. Government officials giving no sign the leadership is about to buckle to U.S. demands.
They are deceiving their soldiers and their officers that aggressing against Iraq and invading Iraq will be like a picnic. Well, this is a very stupid lie they are telling their soldiers. What they are facing is a definite death.
At a hastily called extraordinary session of Iraq's National Assembly, the sentiment just as defiant.
We are ready for all the sacrifices required for the legitimate defense of our land and principles. And the fate of this aggression which they talk about will be the same as before in history. And history will show their failure, disappointment, and will be a curse on them.
As it has so many times in the past, the Assembly sent a letter of solidarity to President Saddam Hussein. For most here now, the waiting seems to be over. The already visible signs of increasing security, an indication of how the war will begin. Hard to tell at this time how it will end, or what the new political landscape may look like. Nick Robertson, CNN, Baghdad.
Welcome back to Crossfire. We are precisely 46 minutes and 37 seconds, if my watch is accurate, away from President Bush's deadline for Saddam Hussein and his sons to leave Iraq. Now, assuming the obvious that Saddam stays put, the U.S. is prepared to put plenty of hardware and manpower into action to enforce the president's declaration. Here to talk about it, a man with first-hand knowledge of using American military power to dislodge a dictator, retired Army General, former NATO Supreme Commander, General Wesley Clark. He led the successful 1999 war to stop ethnic cleansing in Kosovo. He's now a CNN military analyst. Clark, you see us there? See you. Now, General Clark, our viewers will be in a second, I think, looking at live pictures from our camera in Baghdad. When do you think this campaign is going to start, and do you think it will start in Baghdad?
Well, it's a mystery, really. I mean, we just don't know. Technically, it could start in an hour. It might not start until
47 minutes.
It might not start until noon tomorrow. It might start in the middle of the night tomorrow night. There are advantages and disadvantages any way you go on this.
What are the criteria you'd use if you were commanding this operation? I mean, how would you make the judgment about when to start?
Well, obviously, you're not going to start until the troops are ready, but Tommy Franks has said the troops are ready. So now it's a matter of what's your best opportunity to get tactical surprise, plus how well is the psychological operation working, and will you gain something if you let it delay a little bit longer? So they may decide to let it cook.
Right. Jamie McIntyre earlier said that some of the thinking, depending on his age, ice him like a field goal kicker in a big game. You must be having flashbacks back to March of 1999. President Clinton sent his emissary, Richard Holbrooke, to meet Slobodan Milosevic, the dictator who was then Serbian leader, and gave him an ultimatum, gave him a warning. He rejected it as well. You then were the man who got the go order. You had all the forces of NATO arrayed before you. How does General Franks, General Myers, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, how do those generals decide which tools to deploy when? What do you start with?
Well, you have to start with what your objective is. And in the case of Kosovo, we started in the summer of 1998, working on an air campaign plan. And we briefed it to NATO, and then we began the planning. And I remember doing the first video teleconference. I was in Los Angeles, and my air commander was in Europe, and we sat there in a beautiful summer day, both in Stuttgart, Germany, and in Los Angeles, thinking, can this be true? We're really going to plan this campaign against Slobodan Milosevic.
And which piece of hardware did you
well thought out.
Stealth and
they've worked this. This one will probably be the stealth bomber, the B-2. Probably start with Tomahawk missiles. Probably start with air-launched cruise missiles. They're unmanned, so there's a lower risk. They can be programmed in advance. We'll probably
be fired out of aircraft and then out of sea.
Schofield from Washington, D.C. Is it possible for our forces to have any surprise advantage with the intense media coverage that the war plans are getting right now?
Well, not in some general sense. I mean, I think Saddam Hussein has caught on that something's afoot at this point. But, you know, the exact time, as the president said, is unknown. Even CNN doesn't know it, and that gives you a sense of how secret it is. Yeah, absolutely. And I thought Jamie McIntyre at the beginning of the show, reporting from the Pentagon, he's CNN senior Pentagon correspondent, pointing out that it's like putting a field goal kicker on ice. Kelly McCann, the major from the Marines, said that this is like one of the worst things we can do is torment them with this waiting time. So good for them. I support the strategy, even if I don't always agree with the president. From the left, I am Paul Begala. Good night to Crossfire. From the right, I'm Tucker Carlson. Join us again next time for yet more Crossfire with less than 1 minute until the deadline in Iraq. Connie Chung tonight begins right now. Have a great night.
You're looking at a live picture of Baghdad right now. It is seconds away from 4 a.m. there, and time is up. In just seconds, Saddam Hussein's deadline will pass. The question now is, when will President Bush order U.S. troops into Iraq? It is 48 hours since he told Iraqi President Saddam Hussein and his two sons to flee Iraq. It is now 0 hour. Good evening, I'm Connie Chung. There is no sign in Baghdad right now of military activity by either side, but neither government today doubted there soon will be.
This is not assured. This will not be assured. If he decides to finish his invasion, then it will be short. But if he does not, then it will not be a short battle. As my colleague, Mr. Sahab, said, this will not be a picnic for him. It will be a bloody war, and it will take a long time.
American people understand that if force is used, lives may be lost, indeed. I think there's no question the country understands that.
President Bush has given formal notice to Congress of his intent to send U.S. troops into combat. His writers are working on the address he will deliver to the nation after he gives the order. He met today with the National Security Council and held meetings on Homeland Security, which we'll get to a little later.
Right. And successful policy there.
You getting any clue about these air raid sirens, Bob Simon? And I may have to interrupt you at any moment.
No,
okay. All right, let's hold it, Bob. Let's go to Aaron Brown in Atlanta, and he'll get us up to date. Aaron.
Everyone, as you, Larry, thank you. Good evening, everyone. As Larry has said, and we are now hearing reports, air raid sirens are going off in Baghdad. We're also getting indications from our correspondent there, Nick Robertson, that it... Nick, it's Aaron. Can you hear me? These are shots of Baghdad. These are stationary cameras that are set up around the city. It is early morning there, very early morning. The sun yet to come up, as you can tell. Nick, it's Aaron. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
What can you tell us, Nick?
Stand by.
Nick, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, what we heard here in Baghdad a few minutes ago were the air raid sirens going off. We could hear in the distance around the city the sound of anti-aircraft guns being fired. No indication at this time that there is any air campaign ongoing, other than the fact that the air raid siren went off. The anti-aircraft guns started firing from several locations around the city. It is still very early in the morning here. The streets are quiet as they have been all night. The city this time is still a city that has all its street lights on, even though the sun is just coming up here. As far as we can see at the moment, the city does not appear to be under attack, but the air raid sirens did go off, and Iraqi anti-aircraft gun positions did fire into the air about 2 or 3 minutes ago.
Has anything like that happened in the last 24 or 48 hours?
Absolutely not. It appears that Iraq's air defenses are on a hair trigger here, if you will, at this time. Obviously, once the 48-hour deadline that President Bush put into place for President Saddam Hussein to leave the country, the forces here certainly knew they had to be on a defensive standby. I can hear more anti-aircraft gunfire erupting across the city at this time. I don't see any trace of fire. I see trace of fire flying through the air past this hotel. Yeah, now heavy bursts of anti-aircraft gunfire coming up from the cities, coming up from across the city. Heavy anti-aircraft gunfire coming up at this time. So far, we haven't seen any major detonations at this time, but it does appear that Iraq's air defenses at least perceive that they are under threat at this time.
Nick, we are now able to also hear, I gather through the phone line, the same anti-aircraft fire you are hearing. Just stay with me. We expect...
That's correct. You may be able to hear the anti-aircraft gunfire erupting across the city. From where I'm standing, the anti-aircraft gunfire and tracer fire appears to be coming up from at least half a dozen locations across the city. Bursts of the red tracer fire flying up in the air, red tracer fire, yellow tracer fire coming from multiple points across the city.
Nick, just to be...
looking out across the... Yes, go ahead.
Nick, just to be clear, everything you are seeing at this point is going from the ground up. You have yet to see anything from the sky down.
That is absolutely correct. As I look out across the city at this time, where I'm not seeing any detonations, I'm not seeing any explosions impacting on the ground. What we are seeing at the moment, and we have not felt any detonations on the ground, the tracer fire and the anti-aircraft guns are firing intensively in the air from a significant number of locations. As yet, though, we have yet to see an impact on the ground at this time. Certainly it appears that Iraq's air defense systems believe that the city is under attack, or at least under a threat at this moment.
All right, Nick, just stand down for a second, okay? Don't go away, but just stand down for a second, okay? And that's Nick Robertson in Baghdad. It is now coming up towards 6 o'clock in the morning. It's about 5:45 in the morning there. This anti-aircraft fire has been going on. Jamie McIntyre is at the Pentagon. Jamie, is it begun, or is this a false alarm?
Well, I'm not sure it's a false alarm, but as near as we can tell, this is not the beginning of the war. What we were led to believe was that overnight there would be additional strikes that would, quote, prepare the battlefield. Now, we thought those strikes would probably be in the southern no-fly zone. It's possible that southern no-fly zone is in the 33rd parallel, which is south of Baghdad. possible they've struck above the 33rd parallel, close to Baghdad. Again, perhaps taking out some air defenses or some other thing that's perceived as a threat. Now, we were given an indication there would be some activity, but that the war would not be starting at this timetable. So we're going to have to wait and see what the White House has to say.
And in fact, we heard this afternoon a top Pentagon official say, when it starts, there won't be any doubt about it. So I think we're trying to sort through exactly what we have this early morning. We do expect to hear from the White House shortly. These, again, for those of you who are just joining us, are pictures of Baghdad. These are stationary cameras that are set up in a number of locations around the city. Anti-aircraft fire has been going off in the city for some time, but Nick Robertson, who is in Baghdad and I think still on the phone with us, has reported that everything he has seen and heard is all going from the ground up. It is all anti-aircraft fire going up, but to this point he has seen no indication of anything, any bombs, any missiles, any planes coming down.
Opened up. Some are going to come from government buildings. They appear to be opening up now, perhaps to the southeastern side of the city. The anti-aircraft batteries.
Nick, I'm going to interrupt you here. All right, I'm going to interrupt. Ari Fleischer, the president's spokesman.
The opening stages of the disarmament of the Iraqi regime have begun. The president will address the nation at 10:15.
Well, that is about as simple and direct as it could possibly be. The opening stages of the disarmament of Iraq, the words the White House chose to frame this in tonight, has begun, and the president...
Testimony to just kill him, and Secretary Powell responded, Senator, that would assume that we know where he is,
yes,
and we don't.
Well, and as you know, and as I suspect many, or if not most of our viewers know, he is a man, Saddam Hussein is a man who rarely sleeps in the same bed 2 nights in a row. He has many bunkers and palaces, residences all over the country. He is surrounded by a vast security apparatus to protect him. He is not an easy target. There is also, as I suspect many of you know, there is a literal prohibition against assassinating a foreign leader, but once war begins, that prohibition is no longer in play under international law. In Kuwait, Christiane Amanpour and Wolf Blitzer are there. I know both of you are working very hard to find out what you can. What can you tell us?
Christiane, go ahead.
Well, earlier today we were talking to a senior UK official. UK is going to be in charge of liberating, if you like, the southern part of Iraq. And they were talking about what we might expect at the beginning of a campaign, and we were led to believe that the full-scale beginning that we'd been told about was not going to be immediately after the deadline passed. We were being told that it was going to be a major effort to target military targets only, to rain in quite heavy bombs, precision-guided bombs from land and air and sea, and to try to separate those targets, military targets, from any kind of civilian or indeed any kind of Iraqi military that doesn't want to fight. They're very determined, they say, to try to show the Iraqis from the beginning that they are not out to kill or maim unneededly any Iraqi civilians or indeed soldiers who don't want to fight, nor do they want to cause enormous damage to the infrastructure. For instance, we were told today that, let's say they want to take a bridge out, instead of hitting the bridge several times like they did 12 years ago, they might put a crater at one end of the bridge on the ground and at the other end, and may even leave the bridge standing. So we're being told that there will be quite a heavy aerial and land-based, rather sea-based bombardment, but their targets are quite precise.
As you can see
and
now...
if I could just weigh in, Aaron.
I'm sorry, Wolf, can you just hang with me for 1 second, Wolf? Just again, we're just a little bit past 10. You're looking at pictures of Baghdad. We know, because the president's spokesman has told us so, that the opening stages of the disarmament of Iraq is underway. Those were his words. Jamie McIntyre has reported that it was a cruise missile strike at a target of opportunity. We I think, can flesh that out a little bit more. Jamie, at the Pentagon, tell me.
Well, Aaron, a little bit of clarification. We're still trying to figure out exactly the nature of this, quote, target of opportunity. It has been described to me now as a leadership target, which again makes it even more intriguing about what it is. It could possibly be a leadership target. Another defense official said to me that it was not a target that suddenly appeared. It's one they've known about for a while, but it was one that they decided to take a strike at with these cruise missiles. So it's a little piece of the puzzle. We are being told now this was a leadership target.
I apologize for stepping on you there. There are perhaps 100 or so people that the United States would have insisted leave Iraq along with Saddam Hussein and his sons. Whether that was any of them were involved in this, we don't know. We'll find out soon enough, we expect. Wolf Blitzer, we interrupted you a moment ago in Kuwait.
Aaron, first of all, here in Kuwait, it's just obviously just early hours of the morning, very quiet. There's no visible signs whatsoever here of any serious military activity in Kuwait City, although we are relatively far away from the northern part of Kuwait along the border, of course, with Iraq. That's where there are more than 100,000 U.S. troops, another 30,000 or so British troops. They're obviously gearing up to move into Iraq at some point, precisely when, of course, remains up in the air. I also want to caution our viewers to appreciate the fact that while we do have cameras, live cameras around Baghdad, and we're seeing those live pictures, we don't necessarily have live cameras elsewhere around Iraq. And Iraq is a huge country the size of about California. So while there may be a strike, there may be anti-aircraft batteries going off in Baghdad, we have no idea what may be happening around the other parts of Iraq where there are what the U.S. military calls these targets of opportunity, whether there are also airstrikes underway elsewhere in Iraq or whether this is strictly limited to Baghdad where we do have these stationary cameras.
Again, let's just reorient those of you. Anti-aircraft fire heard in the streets of Baghdad. We know we can confirm that a cruise missile strike on a target of opportunity, and we hope we'll find out more specifically what that is. We know from Nick Robertson, who is there, that this, and we've just lost one of those cameras, and whether we have lost all of those cameras and for how long we have lost them, we do not know. But we have now lost the only window that we had into Baghdad. The president will speak to the country in about a minute or so from the White House. What room in the White House, I cannot tell you, though I would suspect it will come from the Oval Office. John King, do you know? Nick? You have something?
Aaron, indeed. A statement just read on Iraq's radio services here, a message from read by a presenter from President Saddam Hussein's eldest son, Uday Saddam Hussein, saying, "God protects us from foreign aggressors. God gives us patience. God protects our leader." That just read a few minutes ago, a message from Uday Saddam Hussein, the president's eldest son, read on Iraqi radio this morning. That's what people here will be hearing as they also hear the anti-aircraft gunfire in this city. Aaron?
Nick, thank you. Thursday morning, now just after 6 o'clock in the morning, the President of the United States, for the second time, is about to tell the country that it is at war. He did it on a Sunday when the war in Afghanistan began in those months after 9/11, and in just a moment he is about to do it again. Here is the President.
4, 3, 2, 1.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war. These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign. More than 35 countries are giving crucial support, from the use of naval and air bases to help with intelligence and logistics to the deployment of combat units. Every nation in this coalition has chosen to bear the duty and share the honor of serving in our common defense. To all the men and women of the United States Armed Forces now in the Middle East, the peace of a troubled world and the hopes of an oppressed people now depend on you. that trust is well placed. The enemies you confront will come to know your skill and bravery. The people you liberate will witness the honorable and decent spirit of the American military. In this conflict, America faces an enemy who has no regard for conventions of war or rules of morality. Saddam Hussein has placed Iraqi troops and equipment in civilian areas, attempting to use innocent men, women, and children as shields for his own military, a final atrocity against his people. I want Americans and all the world to know that coalition forces will make every effort to spare innocent civilians from harm. A campaign on the harsh terrain of a nation as large as California could be longer and more difficult than some predict. And helping Iraqis achieve a united, stable, and free country will require our sustained commitment. We come to Iraq with respect for its citizens, for their great civilization, and for the religious faiths they practice. We have no ambition in Iraq except to remove a threat and restore control of that country to its own people. I know that the families of our military are praying that all those who serve will return safely and soon. Millions of Americans are praying with you for the safety of your loved ones and for the protection of the innocent. For your sacrifice, you have the gratitude and respect of the American people. And you can know that our forces will be coming home as soon as their work is done. Our nation enters this conflict reluctantly, yet our purpose is sure. The people of the United States and our friends and allies will not live at the mercy of an outlaw regime that threatens the peace with weapons of mass murder. We will meet that threat now with our Army, Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard, and Marines, so that we do not have to meet it later with armies of firefighters and police and doctors on the streets of our cities. Now that conflict has come, the only way to limit its duration is to apply decisive force. And I assure you, this will not be a campaign of half measures, and we will accept no outcome but victory. My fellow citizens, the dangers to our country and the world will be overcome. We will pass through this time of peril and carry on the work of peace. We will defend our freedom. We will bring freedom to others, and we will prevail. May God bless our country and all who defend her.
The President of the United States, in taking little more than 4 minutes to say that we are in the early stages of the effort to disarm Iraq. Selected targets are being hit, said the President, to undermine the ability, as you see pictures of Baghdad, to undermine the ability of the Iraqi forces to stop the assault, the broad assault, as the President put it, which is coming, though has not yet begun. Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon.
He always does, John.
Well, Wolf, we are told this pivotal moment, the first moment seeking this target of opportunity, this leadership target that includes Saddam Hussein, is the culmination of a meeting that ran nearly 4 hours in the Oval Office. The President was briefed, we were told, by the CIA Director George Tenet, his National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, told by a senior official that meeting broke up at 7:20 p.m. tonight, Washington time, just 40 minutes before the deadline for Saddam Hussein to leave the country. We are told at that meeting, the President was told that U.S. intelligence sources and Pentagon officials were concerned they would lose a target of opportunity if they did not launch this selective strikes, as the President called them tonight. The President made the decision, we are told, at that meeting, again, that broke up at 7:20 p.m., just 40 minutes before the deadline, to go ahead with this limited operation. And to give you a sense of the businesslike manner of this White House, the operation, the President gave the orders. He went to have dinner with the First Lady. The operation obviously was underway. Mr. Bush came back and made that statement to the American people, and within moments of finishing that statement, Mr. Bush walked back to the White House residence. We are told he is retiring for the night. Vice President Dick Cheney left. We are told he has gone home for the night, and National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice has left the White House as well. You can be certain that Dr. Rice would have stayed on hand had there been planned more any massive scale strikes that would be critical to this operation. So as the President said, selective operations have begun, many more to follow. Aaron?
John, thank you. Senior White House correspondent John King. John, I don't know if you feel it in quite the same way, but we seem to be in a kind of odd moment where we know something has started, something important has happened, but the full impact of it really has not yet started, and we know no more now when it will start than we knew all day long as all of us, I suspect in many cases all over the country, speculated on when it would begin. It's like a brief intermission in some terrible but real movie.
Exactly the case, that sense here at the White House, and a reinforcement of what the President said in his address earlier this week to the American people when he said this war would begin at a time of America's choosing. He said America would strike at a time of its choosing. This is not the shock and awe that we expected on the first night of the war, and we are told by senior officials here, and the President certainly implied it in his remarks, that that is yet to come. But we also were told that the President would act based on the advice of his generals. This is a commander-in-chief who listens to the generals. He does not fancy himself to be one. We are told he asked tough questions, but he trusts them. They came to him tonight and they told him they needed to act quickly. An extraordinary 4-hour meeting, we were told, in the Oval Office. The President said, go ahead, the war has begun.
We just showed our viewers, and maybe we can show it again. Pentagon has just released some initial video from this initial burst of strikes against these selected targets in Iraq. We can see it right now. Looks like a cruise missile being launched. As you well know, these cruise missiles are very accurate. Tell our viewers a little bit about the effectiveness of this cruise missile, if in fact they were fired at a selected target, a leadership position, a command and control facility in Baghdad. How good are these missiles?
These missiles are so precise that they can hit from great distances a target within just a few meters, so-called a circular area of probability. Within a few meters of the target itself, they can strike and devastate that target. So they're very, very precise. They are programmed to hit a specific target and do so almost without fail. Sometimes there are mishaps, sometimes they may go astray, and that is always a concern when you're firing into an urban area, but for the most.
All right, I apologize. As you can imagine, it's really hard to hear you and even hear myself here on the flight line. The F-14 that you just saw take off, I'm not going to give you full names at this point. I'm going to stick with call signs. That was Crunchy and Rico taking off in that jet. Prior to that, it was Tonto and Sully, the first jet to launch off the USS Abraham Lincoln as this campaign against Iraq has begun. This is what I can tell you right now. Operation Southern Watch is still in effect. These jets that are launching off the USS Abraham Lincoln are conducting regular operations with Operation Southern Watch. Of course, at any moment, those jets could be called in to fly over Baghdad. As you know, Aaron, this is a very difficult time for me right now because there's a lot of information that I know, a lot of classified information, and so I've got to be really careful about what I say right now. But what I can tell you is that things are in full swing right now. F-14s are the first strike fighter pilots to launch off the U.S. Abraham Lincoln. You can see the other aircraft getting ready, loading up, getting ready to go. The radar jammers, the Prowlers have also launched off the USS Abraham Lincoln. I've got to stick to pretty much the basics right now. I can tell you they'll be, once heading over Baghdad, Aaron, they'll be going for pretty obvious targets, military targets, government buildings. You know about the decapitation airstrike that already took place with the hopes of getting Saddam Hussein before additional bombs had to be dropped. But at this point, that's what I can tell you. Right now, F-14s in full force, the Tomcatters launching off the USS Abraham Lincoln right now as this conflict with Iraq has begun. Aaron?
This is the first time that we've seen these pictures. You can see the explosions in the background, in the distance. was just before daybreak in Baghdad. You see the flashes. In every earlier picture we had seen out of there, all we had been able to see was the anti-aircraft fire going up, the tracer fire going up to the sky. And so in just a span of 40 seconds, it's about how long that tape went, we were also able to see, as you look at Baghdad this morning, Thursday morning for them, as we approach midnight here in the east, the first time we were able to see anything that had come down, any explosions that had come down. As Jamie McIntyre has been reporting, 2 cruise missile targets, one to the south of Baghdad, an attempt to, in the jargon of the military, decapitate, go after the leadership of Iraq, a target of opportunity, a decision the president signed off on early in the evening, 6:30-ish, if I remember John King's reporting, 6:30 or so in the evening. He gave the go-ahead after the intelligence came in. I'm sorry, go ahead, say that to me again. Okay, thank you. The president signed off early this evening, went back to the residence, talked to his speechwriter, said it is time to go to work. And go to work they did. 10:15 tonight, the president went on national television to tell the country that the opening stages, to use his words, the opening stages of the disarmament of Iraq was underway, and made clear that it was simply that, the opening stages of what will be a broad attack that will begin sometime down the road. Christian Amanpour earlier this evening, 9:40 or so this evening, when Nick Robertson reported it. Nick, what is it like in Baghdad now?
Fighting day, and let's pay attention to that. Repeat, the president, the leader, the fighter, Saddam Hussein, may God protect him, and who is victorious, will shortly address with a speech, with an important speech in this fighting day, in this great day. And let us pay attention to that.
Announcing that Saddam Hussein will shortly go on TV, and these are the pictures. That is what Iraqi TV, I don't know if we can get back to that, it is in a sense a sort of remarkable scene that normal TV programming is going on in Iraq as they await the president of the country to announce that the country has been attacked by the United States. Nick Robertson, are you able to hear me now?
I hear you just fine. Indeed, the broadcaster giving the message that President Saddam Hussein will speak shortly, that's been playing here a number of times this morning. For about the last 40 minutes, that same message is being played out and broadcast to Iraqis here, that their leader will broadcast a message to them soon. Just as we were talking before, the air raid siren here went off again. I saw some people hurrying to get off the streets here. There are not many people around at the moment, but that was just 15 minutes after the all clear going off, the air raid siren going off, and some people hurrying to get off the streets, Aaron. Although right now, nothing appears to be happening.
Nick, our reporting from the Pentagon, from the region, is that nothing major, the major rollout of Operation Iraqi Freedom is not going to happen yet. And earlier, General Clark, I believe it was, talked about the value of starting it at night in the darkness, and we're a long way from that. It's just early morning now in Iraq right now. Earlier, a short time ago, not very long ago, in New York, the Iraqi ambassador to the United Nations talked to reporters how odd it must be to be the country's representative in the United States when the United States has just attacked your country. But this is what he had to say earlier in New York.
Do our best to contact, to tackle this matter within the United Nations and with the Security Council.
What will be the next step to do that then?
Hopefully tomorrow we will start that step.
Exactly what would you try and do?
Well, you know, just perhaps we have to send a letter there to the President of the Security Council and to the Secretary General. You know, this is a breach of peace. So we have to ask them to, otherwise we can do nothing new. me, myself, I can do nothing. I have just to tell the international community that the war is started, this is against the charter, and this is a violation of international law.
Mohammed Al-Douri, there is an element to this, as there is in diplomatic matters, of almost scripting. It was clear, it's been clear for days, that as soon as the Americans began the attack, that the next day the Iraqis would go to the United Nations to protest that, to demand the Security Council take action on that.
First F-18 Super Hornet, that was from the VFA 115 Eagles, has launched off the USS Abraham Lincoln now. The advantages of the Super Hornet, of course, the heat-seeking missiles you probably saw on the side of that aircraft. Also, the bunker busters that we told you about. The Super Hornets, of course, known for their speed and air superiority.
I'm sorry, Kira, we got to interrupt you. We got to go now to the Ministry of Information on Iraqi television. The Minister of Information, let's listen in for just a moment.
Against the tyrant of this era, the Zionist ally, in this day where the determinations will be manifest, and Iraq, under the leadership of the great leader Saddam Hussein, may God protect him. This will be a protection, a shield for this nation, for humanity, against those evils, those tyrants in America and Britain. Dear citizens, the President Saddam Hussein, may God protect him, will speak to you.
All right, that was Mohammed al-Sahad, who is the Minister of Information, speaking on Iraqi television. We have not seen Saddam Hussein. There was a promise. I'm sorry? Go ahead. All right. We're going to stay with this speech now, is that right? All right. We're about to hear from Saddam Hussein. That's what I'm being told right now. And we will probably stay with this picture as we wait for Saddam Hussein to appear. This was promised some time ago. And why don't we send it back to Aaron for now? We'll continue our discussion of cruise missiles later. Aaron.
Thank you. Well, we look at the slide, and that's what it is. What we don't know, honestly, we know that they say Saddam Hussein is alive, and they say that we're going to hear from him, but the truth is that Iraqi information officials have been saying that for at least an hour now, a little longer than that. They say, well, it'll be another 10 minutes, it'll be another 10 minutes. We'll have something on this channel or that channel, but to this point they have not delivered. We know, and you know,
in the name of God, most merciful, most compassionate.
They've delivered now.
Those who are fought as they are treated unjustly were granted permission to fight, and God will give them victory.
Well, we have the beginning of the signal, but we lost it there. As you can see, that's Iraqi TV. You know, I suppose it is in some ways fitting that, here we go.
20th of March 2003, corresponding to 17th of the Muharram of 1422 Hijri. The criminal, Junior Bush, committed, he and his aides, his crime that he was threatening Iraq with, and humanity as well. His criminal act comes from, and the act of those who helped him and his followers. This is added to the series of their shameful crimes against Iraq and humanity. This is a start for other additional crimes. O Iraqis and those who care in our nation, sacrificing for you and for the values of our nation and the banners of fighting and for its religion and for the soul, the family, the son. And here I will not repeat what should be said. It is a duty on all people, good people, that repeat what has to be done to protect and defend this dear nation and the values and sacreds. But I will say to each, this is a must on all of us, but I say on any of us, on each of us in the family of Iraq, the believing, the honest family that is being treated unjustly by its enemies, on all of us, on each of us, we have to remember what was said and what was pledged. And these days will go as God wills. These days will add to your record, your bright record, O you male and female dignified people. This is your share of dignity and victory and everything that will raise the status before God and will let infidels down, the enemies of humanity and God. And that you will be victorious, O Iraqis. And with you are victorious will be with you are the people of the sons of your nation, and you are victorious with the will of God, and your enemies will be in humiliation and defeat, God willing. Go, you sword. I'm not. Draw your sword, and I'm not afraid. Draw your sword. The enemy is making a fuss, and the enemy will not be stopped except by let the rains be let go anyway, but hope is there. Let thunderstorms go until the guidance appears and injustice goes away. And let dawn be the way to confront all bad, and pull your trigger and keep the fire on. Draw your sword. No one will be victorious unless he is a man and a brave man. And prepare a banner and call for the way of God, that the wound will heal quickly. Dear friend, those who call for evil in the world, those who fight evil in the world, peace be upon you. You noticed how Bush, the careless, underestimated your values, that you declared against the war, and your honest call for peace. And he committed this shameful crime this day. We pledge in our name and in the name of the command and leadership and the name of the people, the fighting people and its heroic army in its history and record of civilization. We pledge that we will confront the invaders and we will get them to, God willing, to the limit where they will lose their patience and they will lose any hope in accomplishing what they were driven to by the Zionists, the criminal Zionists, and those who have agendas. They will go to to the lowest levels, and they will be defeated. A defeat that we hope for them after they went far in injustice and evil. We love peace, and we are working towards this. Peace. Iraq will be victorious, will win. And with Iraq, our nation and humanity will win. And evil will suffer from what makes it incapable of doing any evil or crime at a level similar to the American Zionist alliance against nations, and at the forefront is our dignified nation, Arab nation. God is great, God is great. At the beginning, at the forefront is our nation. God is great, God is great. And live long Iraq and Palestine. God is great, God is great. And our Arab nation, dignified nation, let that nation live. And the human brotherhood, let it live with those who love peace and security and the rights of people in freedom according to justice and equality. God is great, and let the losers lose. Let Iraq live. Long live jihad and long live Palestine.
Iraqi President Saddam Hussein, in a speech to his countrymen, what must they think? Saddam Hussein in military garb tonight. Normally we see him in civilian clothes, but the last couple of times we've seen him, he has been in his military uniform. He referred to President Bush as Little Bush. I actually heard it as Junior Bush, but in any case, he wasn't paying the President of the United States a compliment, and described this as a crime against Iraq and a crime against humanity. It is the duty of all good people to protect our dear nation. He said, "I am not afraid." And then, and this is important, 3 different times as I heard it, he referred to Zionists, the American Zionist Alliance. He said, "Long live Palestine." It is certainly the Iraqi president's hope that the Arab world will see this in the context of the long and difficult dispute between...
Thanks very much. Rula Amin, CNN's Rula Amin is standing by in Amman, Jordan, getting initial reaction from a moderate Arab state, a state friendly with the United States, namely that of Jordan. Rula?
Wolf, the day here is just starting. It's about 8 a.m. in the morning. Kids are going to school, and there's very little activity in the town of Ruwayshat. However, 40 minutes away on the border between Jordan and Iraq, there are more activities there. Jordanian students, Jordanian families who were still in Iraq have been trying to leave. They were leaving the border, carrying their luggage, and very few cars going into Iraq. And also, the Jordanian government and the UN agencies are trying their best to set up 2 refugee camps very close to that border. However, very strong wind here and the sandstorm has crippled their work. The Jordan government here is trying to prepare for this war on more than one front. On one hand, security has been beefed up around embassies here, just in case there would be some kind of backlash as a result of this war. Jordan says there are hundreds of U.S. troops here, but they are only here to defend Jordan and to protect it, and that is creating some kind of a controversial issue within Jordan, because some opposition leaders and some of the public don't want to make sure and are calling on the government not to allow the U.S. troops to use Jordan as a launching pad in case there is a war. Wolf?
Nation to say the strike on Iraq had begun and that the U.S. will not accept anything short of victory. With the latest from the White House now, our Chris Burns joins us live. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Heidi. The president, having made this early decision, this is not the pre-scripted shock and awe. This is something that the president had not expected to happen, but he did get information from the CIA during his afternoon meeting on Wednesday, the war planning meeting, that there was a possibility to strike at senior leadership in Iraq. That is as far as the White House goes. They say there was some kind of senior leadership, but this was a major leadership target that they could strike at, and that if they didn't strike soon, they would miss that opportunity. So even though there were perhaps weather problems in Kuwait preventing an offensive on the ground, even though it was not immediately obvious that they would attack right away, this chance was taken with more than 40 cruise missiles to try to strike at leadership targets. One, to try to perhaps cut off the head of the leadership, but also perhaps a psychological strike at the military to show that the U.S. forces did know where some of the leadership was, perhaps to try to damage some of the confidence within the Iraqi military before a full-scale assault would happen. President Bush, in his speech, saying that they do intend to spare lives in this offensive, and that they also attacked President Saddam Hussein and the leadership for allegedly...
Still ongoing. And again, Paula, as we get to all this right now, Tommy Frank's at the podium in Qatar, the first time we have seen him since the conflict broke out 3.5 days ago.
Well, good afternoon. Let me begin by saying that my heart and the prayers of this coalition go out to the families of those who have already made the ultimate sacrifice. Because of the courage and the dedication of these heroes, the mission of Operation Iraqi Freedom will be achieved. As President Bush said, as a last resort, we must be willing to use military force. We are willing, and we're using military force. I'm pleased to be joined today by Air Marshal Brian Burridge, Great Britain, Brigadier Murray McNarn of Australia, Rear Admiral Per T. Demond from Denmark, Lieutenant Colonel Jan Blom from the Netherlands. 4 coalition partners represented here with us, and as many of you would know, we have at our home in Tampa, Florida, the home of Central Command, 52 nations represented. What many of you may not know is that many of these nations are also represented in the command posts of our component commands located in a number of countries in the region. You know, Secretary of Defense Don Rumsfeld, my boss, yesterday outlined the military objectives of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Let me review them with you. First, end the regime of Saddam Hussein. Second, to identify, isolate, and eliminate Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. Third, to search for, to capture, and to drive out terrorists from that country. Fourth, to collect such intelligence as we can related to terrorist networks. Fifth, to collect such intelligence as we can related to the global network of illicit weapons of mass destruction. Sixth, to end sanctions and to immediately deliver humanitarian support to the displaced and to many needy Iraqi citizens. Seventh, to secure Iraq's oil fields and resources which belong to the Iraqi people. And last, to help the Iraqi people create conditions for a transition to a representative self-government. Today I thought I would describe the campaign you're seeing and provide you an operational update. Let me begin by saying this will be a campaign unlike any other in history. A campaign characterized by shock, by surprise, by flexibility, by the employment of precise munitions on a scale never before seen, and by the application of overwhelming force. Let me talk for a minute about our capabilities. The coalition now engaged in and supporting Operation Iraqi Freedom includes Army and Marine forces from the land component, air forces from several nations, naval forces to include the Coast Guard, and special operations forces. Our plan introduces these forces across the breadth and depth of Iraq in some cases simultaneously, and in some cases sequentially. In some cases, our Special Operations Forces support conventional ground forces. Examples of this include operations behind enemy lines to attack enemy positions and formations, or perhaps to secure bridges and crossing sites over rivers, or perhaps to secure key installations like the gas oil platforms, and of course in some cases to adjust air power, as we saw in Afghanistan. Now in some cases our air forces support ground elements or support Special Operations Forces by providing fires and intelligence information, perhaps offensive electronic warfare capabilities. At other times, coalition airmen deliver decisive, precision shock, such as you witnessed beginning last night. At certain points, Special Operations Forces and ground units support air forces by pushing enemy formations into positions to be destroyed by air power. And in yet other cases, our naval elements support air, support ground operations, or support Special Operations Forces by providing aircraft, cruise missiles, or by conducting maritime operations or mine clearing operations. And so the plan we see uses combinations of these capabilities that I've just described. It uses them at times and in places of our choosing in order to accomplish the objectives I mentioned just a moment ago. That plan gives commanders at all levels, and it gives me latitude to build the mosaic that I just described in a way that provides flexibility so that we can attack the enemy on our terms, and we are doing so. And now a bit on what you've seen over the last now less than 72 hours. The initiation of combat operations. We refer to that as D-Day. The introduction of Special Operations Forces. We refer to that as S-Day. The introduction of ground forces, G-Day. And the introduction of shock air forces, A-Day. Additionally, a number of emerging targets have been struck along the way and will continue to be struck as they emerge. So the sequence you have seen up to this point has been S-G-A. That sequence was based on our intelligence reads, how we see the enemy, and on our sense of the capabilities of our own forces. In a few minutes, Brigadier General Vince Brooks, one of our operations officers, will provide a number of visuals which reflect operations up to this point. In the days ahead, you will see evidence of the truth of Secretary Rumsfeld's statement yesterday when he said Saddam Hussein was given a choice by the international community to give up his weapons of mass destruction or lose power. He chose unwisely, and now he will lose both. Let me introduce General Vince Brooks to give you a little bit of an idea of what operations over the last 3 days have looked like. Vince?
Thank you, sir, very much. And ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I want to take a few minutes to brief you now on some of the operations that have occurred by the coalition over the last several days. The operation, of course, began on the 19th of March, and since that time, coalition forces have already achieved a number of several key mission objectives. Our first effort is aggressive and direct attacks to disrupt the regime's key command, control, communications, integrated air defense, and ballistic missiles using very precise targeting and methods that will achieve the desired effects. This video shows an attack against an Ababil 100 in southern Iraq and resulted in its destruction. Our second focus is on special operations. Coalition Special Operations Forces entered Iraq at night after destroying Iraqi military outposts, as this short video shows. You will see two clips. The first is an outpost along the border, and the second is a building that supported observers on the border. The Special Operations Forces then began looking for Saddam Hussein's and the regime's weapons of mass destruction and their ballistic missiles that threaten their neighbors. Additionally, Coalition Special Operations Forces saved 3 key oil terminals that are used for export through the Gulf. And these terminals are key to the future of Iraq. By preventing certain destruction, the coalition has preserved the future of Iraq. This is the area where the 3 terminals were in southern Iraq and in the Arabian Gulf. On these platforms, we found a variety of things. We found weapons, ammunition, and explosives. These explosives are not meant for defenders. Our coalition maritime forces have destroyed the Iraqi naval forces, as the following video shows. Now, this is a patrol boat being attacked from the air, and in a moment you'll see the secondary explosion completing its destruction. It will come in this image here. They're also very active in ensuring that the waterways remain open and unmined so that Iraq is not cut off from the aid that is prepared to flow in. What you see in the next image is a tugboat that appears to be carrying oil drums. In fact, it is a mining vessel that transports mines. Interdictions like this one done by our coalition maritime forces and others over the last few days prevented for sure the release of 139 floating mines into the Khawar Abdullah, which is an inlet that joins the Iraqi inland waterways with the Arabian Gulf. Ground maneuver forces attacked to seize the key Rumaila oil fields and simultaneously began an unprecedented combined arms penetration deep into Iraq. The attack continues as we speak and has already moved the distance of the longest maneuver in the 1991 Gulf War in 1/4 of the time. The oil fields were spared destruction that was intended by the regime because of the effectiveness of these attacks. In the next image, you'll see wells that were set afire on the 19th in the afternoon before the coalition attack began. By the next day, the land component had already entered Iraq and prevented any further destruction. And this is video from the entering forces. And the good news is only 9 of the roughly 500 oil wells that are in the Rumaila oil field, only 9 were sabotaged by the regime. The flame on the bottom shows where that location is. All the rest of them are okay. I should add that the power of information has been key throughout this operation, and it is truly having the effect of saving lives of the Iraqi people and military units who are choosing not to fight and die for a doomed regime. Leaders from several regular army divisions surrendered to coalition forces, and their units abandoned their equipment and returned to their homes, just as the coalition had instructed. We know that there are other forces on the battlefield that we haven't even arrived at yet, and as this next image shows, there are Iraqi units that are preparing to surrender, even now as we speak. These are lines of roughly 700 Iraqi soldiers that we've imaged in the desert, away from their equipment, awaiting our arrival. The coalition is committed to disarming Iraq, but the coalition is equally committed to bringing humanitarian assistance to the Iraqi people. Our humanitarian work in Iraq is only beginning. The U.S. military, coalition partners, and other civilian organizations from around the world have positioned millions of meals, medicines, and other supplies for the Iraqi people. This image shows some of the stocks of humanitarian daily rations that we are already preparing to push forward as they're required. Our coalition forces will continue to coordinate closely with a broad array of organizations and ensure that as much aid as is possible can be provided to the Iraqi people when it is required and where it is required. Sir?
Thanks, Vince. So as we speak, our forces are operating inside Iraq. We have operations ongoing in the north, in the west, in the south, in and around Baghdad. Our troops are performing as we would expect, magnificently. And indeed, the outcome is not in doubt. There may well be tough days ahead, but the forces on the field will achieve the objectives that have been set out by the governments of this coalition. And with that, we'd be pleased to take your questions. Please.
George Stephanopoulos, ABC News. I wonder if you could comment on the status of the surrender negotiations with the senior Iraqi military or civilian leadership. Are they continuing? Are you personally involved? And is the U.S. willing to accept a coalition of Iraqi commanders to assume control as part of a deal?
George, I wouldn't comment on what the U.S. government is prepared to accept. I'd leave that for my boss to talk about. I will say that we have ongoing dialogues, as I think was mentioned in the Pentagon press brief yesterday, with a number of senior Iraqi officials. And so those discussions, both with people in uniform and not in uniform, will continue in the hours and the days ahead.
Are you involved?
Please.
General Tom Fenton, CBS News. The campaign so far has gone with breathtaking speed. Has it surprised you, or is it going more or less as you expect?
I think anytime forces are joined in a war, it's a blessing when very few people lose their lives. It's a blessing when it's possible for us to move in the direction of our objectives. I believe that that the time for us to celebrate will be when the mission is accomplished. We believe that we are on our timeline, as we say, and I am satisfied with what I see up to this point, sir.
He does not greet reporters often, but today Tommy Franks did break his silence for the first time since Operation Iraqi Freedom has gotten underway down the coast in Qatar, where Central Command has been established for this ongoing conflict. While Tommy Franks was talking, our CNN crew just out of Iraq, feeding in some videotape taken earlier today in and around Baghdad. We're going to roll in some of this tape right here, and as you look at it, I have not seen it myself. I understand, though, it shows extensive damage throughout the Iraqi capital. As you get a look at that, just let's go over some facts quickly as to what we learned from Tommy Franks, saying today that no coalition aircraft have been damaged thus far. Also saying, as we reported yesterday, only 9 wells have been sabotaged thus far. The waterways, a major effort to keep them open. The southeastern part of Iraq, 139 floating sea mines have been located and secured. Asked quite directly as to whether or not the coalition forces have found evidence of weapons of mass destruction. Bit of an evasive answer, not quite clear from Tommy Franks, but he did say quite pointedly later, there is no doubt, he says, no doubt that Saddam Hussein's regime has weapons of mass destruction. A lot of talk, too, about whether or not the Iraqi leader is still alive. When asked that question, pretty frank as well from Tommy Franks, saying, I don't know. At one point, he stressed the fact that this military plan is flexible and it has to stay that way, and I believe we saw that on Wednesday night when we saw the first cruise missiles go into central and southern Baghdad about 2 hours before that 48-hour ultimatum deadline was issued from the White House. Again, the pictures from Baghdad from our CNN crew fed in a short time ago. And as we watch those, we go back to New York. And again, here's Paula.
Bill,
Paula?
we're going to stay with that picture and add a little more to what you've just said because we have the time. General Tommy Franks describing the start of the shock and awe part of this campaign is going exceptionally well. He said the targeting has been precise, that all precise munitions have been used, and that no targets selected were inappropriate. He said the Baghdad targets chosen, or that were chosen to avoid non-combatants. We're going to stay with this picture as we talk with General Shepard because this is probably the clearest idea of how specific this video showing us how specific these targets are and were yesterday about 1 p.m. Eastern time. General Shepard, the Iraqis are saying that 19 missiles hit their sites. Have you been given any suggestion that it is actually more than that?
Paul, I have. Some of the information we have is that there were 39 targets struck in this complex, and multiple weapons were employed on many of these targets. As I just look and count the impacts there, it looks to me like a lot more than 19. But I'll make one point. This has been referred to by many people as the bombing of downtown Baghdad. That's partially true. This is in downtown Baghdad, but it's a confined area on the western bank of the Tigris River, the governmental and military area of the west bank of the Tigris River there. So it's a very confined area, and I suspect it'll be struck again, Paul.
The other thing I want you to talk about as we continue to look at these exclusive pictures I wasn't even aware that we had, as Nick Roberts and his crew were expelled from Iraq. They captured this from their hotel balcony before they made it to the Jordanian border. The two words that I heard General Tommy Franks use a number of times were agile and flexibility in describing this plan and the number of actions that can happen at the same time. What is it that we should expect?
Well, I'll give you an example of what he's talking about. He had planned, according to the information we have, to basically launch the air campaign, the shock and awe campaign first, and to be followed simultaneously but behind the air campaign with the ground war. Because of the setting on fire of the oil wells, he launched the ground campaign first, and then several days later, or rather a couple days later, the shock and awe of the air campaign. So he was flexible enough to do that, and the other flexibility he demonstrated was the emerging leadership target, the decapitation target, that took but a few hours to basically organize, get the approval, and then get all the munitions flowing en route.
Begin.
Have begun a concerted campaign against the regime of Saddam Hussein. In this war, our coalition is broad, more than 40 countries from across the globe. Our cause is just, the security of the nations we serve and the peace of the world. And our mission is clear, to disarm Iraq of weapons of mass destruction, to end Saddam Hussein's support for terrorism, and to free the Iraqi people. The future of peace and the hopes of the Iraqi people now depend on our fighting forces in the Middle East. They are conducting themselves in the highest traditions of the American military. They are doing their job with skill and bravery, and with the finest of allies beside them. At every stage of this conflict, the world will see both the power of our military and the honorable and decent spirit of the men and women who serve. In this conflict, American and coalition forces face enemies who have no regard for the conventions of war or rules of morality. Iraqi officials have placed troops and equipment in civilian areas, attempting to use innocent men, women, and children as shields for the dictator's army. I want Americans and all the world to know that coalition forces will make every effort to spare innocent civilians from harm. A campaign on harsh terrain in a vast country could be longer and more difficult than some have predicted. And helping Iraqis achieve a united, stable, and free country will require our sustained commitment. Yet whatever is required of us, we will carry out all the duties we have accepted. Across America this weekend, the families of our military are praying that our men and women will return safely and soon. Millions of Americans are praying with them for the safety of their loved ones and for the protection of all the innocent. Our entire nation appreciates the sacrifices made by military families, and many citizens who live near military families are showing their support in practical ways, such as by helping with child care or home repairs. All families with loved ones serving in this war can know this. Our forces will be coming home as soon as their work is done. Our nation entered this conflict reluctantly, yet with a clear and firm purpose. The people of the United States and our friends and allies will not live at the mercy of an outlaw regime that threatens the peace with weapons of mass murder. Now that conflict has come, the only way to limit its duration is to apply decisive force. This will not be a campaign of half measures. It is a fight for the security of our nation and the peace of the world, and we will accept no outcome but victory. Thank you for listening.
Baghdad now, where there's signs of yet another explosion. Eyewitnesses on the ground telling us they had heard 5 so far, those starting at dusk. It is not clear exactly what is going on here. From the Pentagon, we're told there are a couple of different theories because nothing has actually been confirmed so far. One idea is that much earlier today, in our 7 o'clock hour, that maybe a fuel depot was targeted, and there is another possibility. The Iraqis have dug some oil ditches, and if they have done that and set them on fire, their goal would be to obscure laser-guided weapons. Now, the satellite-guided weapons wouldn't be threatened by this at all or affected by it, but the laser-guided weapons would be. We really don't know what we're looking at here, although we have seen a cloud of billowing black smoke. We've been watching it for the better part of 4 hours now. We have talked with a person from the Red Cross, a representative from the Red Cross, who also confirmed he heard the same explosions. We're going to keep an eye on this as we get a better context. I don't know if we have Barbara Starr up yet at the Pentagon to see if we can get any confirmation of this latest report of explosions. We do know that air raid sirens have not been sounded, according to the witnesses who witnessed these first blasts, although they did hear sirens of ambulances and police cars cruising through the city. That account reported to us about 45 minutes ago. But this latest report comes just moments ago of another explosion being heard in downtown Baghdad. Now, just to give you a perspective on this, what is being called a rolling campaign, the first 24 hours of shock and awe, some 2,000 sorties are expected to be flown in the first 24 hours, 1,500 cruise missiles or bombs being dropped. Now I think we see tracer fire or anti-aircraft fire. Can't really make it out from this picture. That appears to be, I believe, anti-tracer or tracer fire. We have General Don Shepard, who's going to join us from CNN Center, who can much better recognize this than we can. Once again, just to give you an idea of the barrage that we saw yesterday at about 1 p.m. Eastern Time, a 7-minute barrage, very specific targets, we are told by General Franks, hit. There are additional targets, he said, that must be considered. He called the first day of the shock and awe campaign is going exceptionally well. General Franks saying the targeting that we had seen was precise, all involving precise munitions. He said no targets were selected that weren't entirely appropriate, and by that he meant that these are targets that were chosen to avoid non-combatants. We keep an eye on this. We see pretty much what we saw yesterday at 1 p.m. General Shepard, what do you think we're looking at here, sir?
Well, I think that we're looking at the beginning of a second day or a second night of bombing in downtown Baghdad, restriking targets that the daytime assessment said were not successfully struck, and then additional targets in the same area. I think this is just more of the pressure on the Iraqi leadership to say this is going to continue until you surrender or the regime is changed.
And what are you seeing visually? Was that tracer?
Yeah, that was tracer fire there. Now, what we've seen up until now is basically before the aircraft and bombs begin to impact, we see tracer fire starting. Now, there's lots, doesn't mean that their radar is up or detecting stealth aircraft or anything of that sort. It means they've got some type of warning. The warning can come in many ways. People can see the cruise missiles launched from the ship, the Tomahawk missiles launched from the ship in the Persian Gulf, and do simple mathematics, distance equals rate times time, and assume when they can get there. When they see jamming starting to appear on their scopes, they know something is about to happen or suspect something's about to happen. And then, of course, they can also hear Tomahawk missiles, and they can hear aircraft as well. So this
Tell
is
us what follows the tracer fire, General. In the past, what we saw at about 1 p.m. Eastern Time yesterday was anti-aircraft fire coming from a number of different quadrants of the city, right?
Yeah, what it tells me is they have their anti-aircraft, or their air defense system is still very sophisticated. They do sector fire, they control it, they start together, they stop together, they cover the right sectors of the sky at the same time, hoping that aircraft will flow into that, and they also fire missiles. The missiles don't seem to be guided as I've watched them launch, but it's still a robust and air defense system that's with command and control over it.
Is it sophisticated enough to know exactly what it's hitting, or they just fire a bunch of it and hope they strike something?
That's exactly what they do, Paula. They cannot see on their radars, and then many of the guns that they're shooting are not radar guided at all. They're simply firing into a sector of the sky, hoping that they spear something, the golden BB, if you will. And then, of course, at the end of the time of flight, you see flashes in the sky. That's when the shells self-destruct so they don't fall down on the homeland territory of those that are firing them. And that flak can also hit things. But the idea is to hit it with the bullet, and the destruction of the shells is peripheral.
General Shepard, stay here with us. I'm just going to quickly recap for our viewers what we are watching right now. We had heard 4 hours ago that there might have been the beginning of daytime, or right at dusk, a strike of a fuel depot. What we're seeing now is what the General describes as tracer fire, followed by anti-aircraft fire. General Shepard, for those of us, folks who were watching yesterday's time, this looks pretty similar in advance of that 7-minute barrage.
Yeah, let me give you a couple of notes on this. Tracer fire is anti-aircraft fire. Now, the lower level, when you see them low to the ground like that, is generally the lower caliber weapons. When you see them going up higher in the sky, are very tracers that last a long time. That's high caliber weapons that reach up to high altitudes. This is probably a combination of 37, 57, 85, and 100 millimeter anti-aircraft fire. These are Soviet guns that have existed since the Vietnam War and still exist. They're very, very lethal.
And what do you think they have more of, this lower caliber weapon or the higher caliber weapon?
Well, always you have more of the lower caliber weapon, but the lower caliber weapon hits things at low altitude. The aircraft and weapons attacking may or may not be at low altitude.
And we are watching this as we hear the call to evening prayer going on. General Shepard, I think a lot of people would like to know what it is that is left in downtown Baghdad to hit. The Iraqis claiming 19 different targets were hit yesterday. The Pentagon saying more than that. What is left to hit here?
A lot is left to hit in this area on the west bank of the Tigris. Let me give you a little tutorial, if you will, on that west bank. If you think of Washington, D.C., think of standing at the Pentagon and looking toward the Capitol, looking past the Lincoln Monument, up the mall to the Capitol, across to the Supreme Court. That's about the length of this area. And then think of looking left toward Georgetown. That's about the area that you're looking at, about a 2.5 square mile area, and there's lots left to hit in there, a lot of it perhaps underground. So I suspect we'll be restriking some of the targets and hitting new ones as well, Paula.
The air defenses are located, we are told, inside some highly populated areas. What kind of a challenge is that to work around?
It's a big challenge. Now, your fixed missile sites are going to be located probably in peripheral areas, not in the real populated areas, just because they're so big and complicated. The anti-aircraft guns themselves will be put on top of apartment buildings and that type of thing. Those going after the anti-aircraft will have to be very, very careful not to cause civilian casualties, and there are plans to deal with that type of thing in order. But what you want to do first is you want to put out the radar eyes, you want to put out the fixed missile sites, then you go against the mobile missile sites. Later you take care of the anti-aircraft. You may or may not do it from the air, you may do it from the ground, Paula.
All right, joining us now, Colonel Mike Turner, to add to what we're seeing on the screen. Colonel Turner, what are you looking at?
Paula. Just to add to General Shepard's comments, my backseater in F-4s transitioned into F-111s and flew over Baghdad during Desert Storm. His reports from the cockpit on one of these raids were pretty amazing. The anti-aircraft shells explode, and when they get thick enough, if you happen to fly through them in a certain way, you can actually smell the cordite, the gunpowder from the puffs of these explosions coming through the air conditioning system of the aircraft. It's a pretty intense time, and even though it's barrage fire and unguided fire, as General Shepard said, the golden BB, as we used to call it, can still do some pretty serious damage.
And how threatening is that for pilots?
Well, obviously it's very threatening. The severe threat is radar-guided munitions, whether it's AAA or surface-to-air missiles. And at this point in the air campaign, I have to believe that we've shut down most of those systems. So this is unguided barrage fire. It tends not to be very accurate, and the threshold has been reduced dramatically of the threat to the air crews as they come by. So
for the
it's
folks
a
that are
lot
just
safer
joining us, we are looking at what General Shepard believes to be another round of nighttime bombing here in Baghdad. General Shepard, we have been since 7 o'clock pretty much tracking a large black billowing cloud coming from a part of downtown Baghdad, and we never could get it confirmed from the Pentagon what that was. Some witnessing there was a daytime strike. You said it's possibility a fuel depot hit, but also there's a possibility that the Iraqis dug oil ditches to create a cloud of smoke to obscure laser-guided weapons.
It could be that these are some of the trench fires that we've been talking about, although it appears to me that it's a single plume coming up. That's what led me to believe that perhaps we struck a fuel depot for the Republican Guard forces. I just don't know. We're going to have to watch. Setting trenches on fire does affect laser-guided weapons. It does not affect satellite-guided weapons. I wanted to make another point on the AAA fire, if I could. Those of us who have been at this a long time have had a lot of experience with AAA. Not only can you actually smell the cordite passing close to your airplane, but you can also hear and feel the rounds. It sounds like a thump on the side of your airplane. It's the sonic waves. If they pass close to your airplane, you can hear this thump, 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 thump passing, and you can also smell the cordite. This stuff is very, very dangerous and very thick, but the point I want to make is this is disciplined anti-aircraft fire. These guys know what they're doing. They're firing in sectors where they suspect that aircraft may be and may fly through it, so it's highly dangerous.
We watch this as we hear the evening prayer being called. General Shepard, the other thing I wanted to ask you about, you talk about how sophisticated the Iraqi air defenses are, and yet you say they're basically blanketing the whole sky and firing somewhat indiscriminately. What does it mean that we have seen this AAA fire always in advance of an attack? Do they know it's coming, or are they just acting protectively here?
A little bit of both, and this is not indiscriminate firing at all. They are telling them where, the command and control of this, the commanders of the air defense units are telling them what sectors to aim at. So if you've got several guns, you will tell them to cover various portions of the sky. You will tell them when to fire, and it's based on a good guess. Somebody will hear something, or it will be followed up, fire in this sector. They turn the fire on in that sector, then they turn it off to save ammunition and cool the barrels, then they reload. So this is again, well-disciplined fire from a sophisticated air defense system that's still very dangerous and has to be degraded over time.
I guess by indiscriminate I meant they really don't know exactly what they're firing at, but they have it very carefully calibrated so they hit all quadrants of the sky?
That's basically true. Now, when you say all quadrants, they probably know what sectors to expect that it's coming from based upon the inputs they're getting from telephone calls and reports on the ground, and they will turn on sectors. They don't necessarily blanket the entire sky, but they fire where their best guess is that weapons or aircraft are coming in from.
And what is the possibility they know exactly what is coming their way?
I don't think they do, but they, by just knowledge of military weapons, they know that it's Tomahawk missiles, cruise missiles, and aircraft dropping bombs. Any air defender knows that.
Colonel Turner, we're going to bring you back into discussion here. We have had eyewitnesses saying they heard 5 large explosions within the last hour, and then a more recent report over the last 5 minutes of another loud blast. We see no evidence in the sky of that, do we?
No, but you know, we're dealing with an awful small sliver of information at this point, and so we have to take educated guesses. The way this is developed, this rolling campaign, if you will, is there's a target list developed by planners months in advance, and they work down the target list, and they're constantly assessing what the effects have been of the previous raids and what the battle damage assessment is on the previous targets, and they continue to work down that target list. And so it's difficult to tell where they are on the target list and what specifically they've struck. And of course, there is always the possibility that, in fact, it didn't come from the air, that it's some sort of operation on the ground by Iraqis, and just an awful small sliver of information at this point to work with.
Let's talk specifically, gentlemen, about the targets that might be included. General Shepard, you were talking about this a little bit earlier today. Republican Guard trenches, additional palaces, Ba'ath Party headquarters. What else?
Well, right now, you're going to finish up on what you consider to be the command, control, and bunker targets, the ability to take out the eyes and communications of the leadership. Now, as we progress further into this campaign, what you're going to see is campaigns against deployed Republican Guard forces. These forces are probably well integrated in populated areas right now, but if they intend to oppose coalition forces that are coming toward Baghdad, they are going to have to assemble. And when they assemble, they're going to become targets. So you will watch that very carefully through all of your intelligence means, and then you will strike it when appropriate and take collateral damage into consideration, Paula.
Is there any doubt in your mind that we're about to witness another large barrage over Baghdad?
My guess is that we are. I'm guessing like everyone else, but it would make sense to do so.
Help us better understand the breadth of resources that are required for the coalition forces to pull this off. I had heard earlier today over 30 different bases are being used.
Yeah, this is an amazing thing to realize. Remember the last display that we witnessed yesterday was a 7-minute barrage, if you will. This 7-minute barrage was assembled from really 38 locations, including 30 various air bases, most in the region. Diego Garcia, the United Kingdom, and Whiteman Air Force Base, as well as all the bases in the region, and 5 aircraft carrier battle groups between the Mediterranean, the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea, and then destroyers, cruisers, and submarines. Now, all of this has to be orchestrated and timed so that it will arrive in accordance with the war plan. The last strike, it was within about 7 minutes. I have no idea if it comes what it will be this time. But orchestrating all of this, doing it between forces from different nations, making sure that the jamming is there on time, making sure that everything is coordinated. The air routes in are diplomatically okay. The air routes in are coordinated and deconflicted so that people don't run into each other. The air-to-air resources that are there to protect the strike forces don't shoot down our own airplanes. They are able to sort enemy aircraft from friendly aircraft. This is all absolutely unbelievable. It comes from years of training, from very, very good equipment.
On the move once more. We're riding with them. This is our vehicle in conjunction with a convoy heading west now, leaving Basra behind us and the main oil field objective that they captured yesterday. But speaking of oil, take a look out the window here as we travel along. There, the brilliant orange plume. It seems to be a key indicator of an oil well that was set alight. There are said to be about 9 oil wells burning in this part of southern Iraq, nowhere near as bad as the projections some had made about the scorched earth policy of Saddam Hussein. And now take a look forward. This is the convoy, mostly made up of Marines of the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. That vehicle right there, an AAV, an amphibious assault vehicle. This convoy is heading off west to a new objective. So far, we haven't been told what that is, but eventually the goal is going to be all the way to Baghdad. For the Marines here, these amphibious vehicles work just as well in the desert as they do in water, and they're doing just fine on the highway, a highway that is shared with a lot of military might, all moving up from northern Kuwait and farther into Iraq. Martin Savage, CNN, with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines in southern Iraq.
CNN's Martin Savage, who is there with the Marines. Let's listen.
Let me tell you what is going on. Those are secondary blasts coming. This is the demolition of the tanks, T-55 tanks along the line here. What they're doing is hurriedly setting charges. They're using both C4 and other explosive devices, as well as the ammunition that's on board the tank itself. What they've done is they've blown it up, essentially. Now you're hearing the secondary explosions. That would be coming from the rounds inside. They want to make sure they don't leave anything behind that could be used by, say, follow-on soldiers, Iraqi soldiers that might be in hiding right now. The moment they find armor, the moment they find any tanks, they're blowing it up. And that's exactly what is taking place in the background here. Whoa! All right. Yeah, that was a tow missile. Fired in the general area where you saw that tank before that was being blown up. Obviously, they're seeing stuff down there they're not too happy about, not taking any chances. The tow missile is a very heavy weapon. They throw the tube off the top. They'll get ready to reload again. They'll try to move positions, too. we're not exactly sure what they're seeing up there at this point. I mean, obviously, we're still trying to keep our heads up around ourselves. At the same time, the demolition crews are preparing the other tanks, and we'll try to bring that to you. They seem to be concerned about, obviously, the village itself. Not that there is obvious reason to be suspect. It's just that that's an area of population. You keep an eye on that. You want to make sure that any Iraqi soldiers, anyone who might want to do the U.S. military harm, is not using the village as shelter, as cover, a place where they can easily melt away into. So that's their concern there. Well, there you go. It's getting hot. Let's go.
An extraordinary day in Chicago because we are getting democracy playing out in full flower here. We've got both sides represented. I am myself in the midst of a rally in support of the troops. This gentleman here says, well, you're for the president. I hear you, sir. On this side is those supporting the war. On the other side, you see some folks anti-war. And they've been remarkably respectful to each other, is my read of it thus far. They're supported by, or they're separated by about 50, 60 feet, as well as some police officers who are doing their best to keep it all together. I want to ask this young lady, why are you here today?
I'm here to support the troops, and God bless America.
Now, I got to ask you, we're looking over on the other side as well. We've got both sides sort of represented here today. Do you feel these folks are unpatriotic by demonstrating against the war when soldiers are in the field?
I don't think they're being unpatriotic. I think they're like, we're here for every right. Everyone has an opinion, and I'm just one person going for the troops with all amongst these people, and we're here for democracy.
Very strong feelings, and many would say that's what makes America the country that it is. I mentioned Brian Cabell in Atlanta, and I believe he is with us. He was telling us a little earlier this afternoon that there was a large crowd of people gathered around the CNN Center building in downtown Atlanta, that they were moving on down, I believe, north on Peachtree Street. Brian, are you with us? All right, we're gonna move on right now, but again, strong.
There we see people getting ready to speak.
Briefings. On a very sad note, I'd like to offer the condolences of the department to the families and friends of the U.S. and coalition forces who have died in the first 72 hours of operations. The Americans are Major J. Thomas Aubin, Marine Corps, Waterville, Maine; Captain Ryan Anthony Beaupre, U.S. Marine Corps, Bloomington, Illinois; Corporal Brian Matthew Kennedy, U.S. Marine Corps, Houston, Texas; Staff Sergeant Kendall Damon Watersby, U.S. Marine Corps, Baltimore, Maryland; Second Lieutenant Terrell S. Childers, U.S. Marine Corps, Harrison County, Mississippi; Lance Corporal Jose Gutierrez, U.S. Marine Corps, Los Angeles, California; excuse me, and Lieutenant Thomas Mullen Adams, U.S. Navy, La Mesa, California. We are all very proud of these people, the U.S. and the coalition forces, who are performing with incredible courage and skill and dedication. They're doing an outstanding job, and they're imposing some devastating impacts on the Iraqi regime. Although much work lies ahead, and you'll hear us saying that repeatedly, coalition forces are making considerable progress. The oil fields in the south are being saved to benefit the Iraqi people. Coalition forces have the key port of Qasr and are making good progress in Basra. The Iraqi forces, including some leadership, are surrendering and defecting in some numbers. I think we have a few recent images here. It is only a matter of time before the Iraqi regime is destroyed and its threat to the region and the world is ended. As we've made clear from the beginning, this is not a war against a people, a country, or a religion, and the Iraqi people who are welcoming coalition forces are clear evidence that they know this to be true. As operations go forward, we will continue to take extraordinary care to protect civilians. Our targets are military, and we continue to urge civilians to stay home and away from military assets. Additionally, we are prepared to provide as much humanitarian aid as required when and where it is needed. Very sadly, we are also aware of the reports this morning and this afternoon of journalists who are not embedded with coalition forces that have been killed and wounded. We can't confirm that for you, and we'll leave it up to their news organizations to provide further details. But it brings me to a very important point. As we've said many times, the situation in Iraq is fluid. It is quite dangerous. There are combat operations underway in a number of areas. We ask all news organizations to exercise restraint, especially with their journalists who are out there operating freely, and ask them to exercise restraint. There are risks. Combat operations are moving in a fast and unpredictable fashion. The coalition forces will, of course, exercise extreme care whenever there are non-combatants. However, reporters who get between coalition and Iraqi forces put themselves at extreme risk. And finally, I'd like to repeat a caution about the operations overall. As successful as they have been thus far, and as confident as we are about the inevitable outcome, we know challenges and difficulties may still lie ahead. General.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. I, too, would like to extend my condolences to the families of our British allies and those of our families who've lost loved ones in combat over the last days. Operation Iraqi Freedom continues. A-Day began yesterday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The goal of the air campaign is to neutralize Iraqi leadership, suppress missile threats to our forces and Iraq's neighbors, support our special forces operations, to target Republican Guard, Special Republican Guard, and Iraqi intelligence service operations, as well as be on call for combat air control missions for time-sensitive targeting. More than 1,000 sorties were flown against several hundred targets across Iraq yesterday. More than 400 Tomahawk cruise missiles were launched from United States Navy and British ships and submarines. Additionally, about 100 air-launched cruise missiles were fired, and several hundred precision-guided munitions were dropped by coalition aircraft on targets throughout Iraq. On the ground, coalition forces continue the main attack towards Baghdad. Ground forces have reached more than 150 miles into Iraqi territory and have crossed the Euphrates River. Coalition forces are advancing north beyond An-Nasiriyah. As General Franks mentioned, there are between 1,000 and 2,000 Iraqi soldiers who have surrendered and been taken into custody. And although numbers are hard to determine, we've seen significant evidence of many Iraqi soldiers simply abandoning their equipment and leaving. Clearly, Operation Iraqi Freedom is moving forward. The success to date is a product of meticulous planning, effective integration of air, maritime, ground, and special operations forces, and the impressive accomplishments of the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen of the coalition.
Bob.
But the operation's not over. There's a long way to go in much of the Iraqi armed forces, highlighted by 6 Republican Guard divisions and Special Republican Guard divisions, who may still fight. So we must remain prepared for potentially tough fights as we move forward. That said, while the progress and timing of the operation remains impossible to forecast, the outcome is not. With that, we'll take your questions.
Bob.
General, you referred to the 1,000 to 2,000 approximately Iraqis in custody. What became of the 8,000 members of the 51st that were said to have surrendered yesterday? Were they just allowed to go home, or what's become of those?
So we're seeing several phenomenon. The commander of the 51st Division, one of his senior leaders, in fact, surrendered themselves individually. We also see soldiers essentially leaving the battlefield or melting away. The unit did not surrender en masse. What we have for numbers is, as General Franks outlined this morning, as of this morning, between 1,000 and 2,000 actually in an EPW status.
So in that specific case, you say only the commanders are in custody, the rest of them just left or allowed to leave? Or?
So I don't have any more information beyond what I provided.
Sorry, first of all, a procedural question. Going back to Kosovo, will you be doing this on an almost daily basis now as long as the war lasts? And I have a question for the General.
For the foreseeable future, but we'll see the level of activity and interest. But for now, that'll be the general game plan. Try to get CENTCOM to brief early afternoon their time, early morning our time, and then someone from here early afternoon.
Great. General, thank you. Welcome. You're going to learn to love us while you're here. Question, you say that the forces have crossed the Tigris. Any other major...
Euphrates, sir. I was sent to a particular location in Iraq near the city of Nasiriyah and worked with many other airplanes, A-10 Thunderbolts, and ground troops. And our number one job is to keep our ground troops safe that are on the ground and make sure that their way is clear as they move forward.
What kind of ammunition do you carry? What armaments? What kind of bombs and missiles?
The A-10 is built around a 7-barrel Gatling gun. It carries 30-millimeter bullets. We carry almost any flavor of bombs you can imagine, and infrared and electro-optical Mavericks.
On this mission, you don't always use them. Did you use them on this mission?
On most missions we don't, but on this mission I cleaned off the jet, so to speak. We found a military compound that had not surrendered, and after 30 to 40 minutes of very significant delays to ensure that there was no collateral damage and that the target was positively identified, there were no friendlies or any non-combatants in the area, we were given permission to engage and destroy.
Colonel Webb is from Boise, Idaho. He also told us that he had audio evidence in his cockpit that an Iraqi missile was fired in his direction. He took measures to avoid that missile. He acknowledged to us he was scared. He also told us he would have another mission tomorrow.
Welcome back. We have a breaking news development. Our colleague from our sister publication, Time Magazine, Jim Lacey, is covering the 101st Airborne Division. He's joining us now live on the phone. Jim, what's going on?
Right now, as far as I could tell, about 15 to 20 minutes ago, there was two blasts at Camp Pennsylvania in New Jersey. Right at the moment, they believe both of those blasts were grenades. They happened in the tents directly behind me, holding a lot of key members of the brigade, 1st Brigade staff here. We've had at least 8 wounded, 4 to 6 of them seriously. I have not seen anybody that's been killed yet. They are holding 2 people here, but they may just be contractors. They're not sure if they have the people who did it. Right now, they are saying this is a terrorist attack, and the infantry is now forming up to secure the entire perimeter and area. They do not think they have who did this yet.
What you're suggesting, you're in Kuwait now at the Camp New Jersey and Camp Pennsylvania. These are U.S. military outposts here in Kuwait. So the suspicion is that there are terrorists on the loose who threw these hand grenades at U.S. troops, members of the 101st Airborne. Is that what you're saying, Jim?
It's the middle of the night here, and the suspicion is that 2 grenades, one in each, and one of, my mistake, 2 tents, 2 grenades, and the people who did it ran off into the darkness. They've got a 3-mile run to the post here at Camp Pennsylvania, to the berm. So the area is being secured. They're confident they're going to get whoever did this. But the carnage inside of those tents is pretty severe. They are still smoking. I had been in one to carry 2 soldiers out on a stretcher. The wounds on those 2 cases look very severe. They are still loading the ambulance right in front of me, and there's still a bunch of chaos going on here as they try and get a perimeter set up.
Jim, before I let you go, Jim, review once again how many U.S. soldiers have been injured?
They are now counting 8. They believe 6 have been seriously injured. I have personally seen 5 seriously injured taken onto ambulances and carried 2 of them. They are just putting the last seriously wounded person in an ambulance now. There are medics all over the place. There is at least two slightly wounded officers who are organizing the defense and have not left the area yet.
And how far away were you, Jim, from these soldiers when those hand grenades went off?
I was in the next tent about 20 yards away.
So you're just lucky that it wasn't you, Jim Lacey, embedded. You're embedded with the 101st Airborne, is that right?
I am, and it seems that whoever did this knew exactly what tents to go for. They got the 2 leadership tents.
What's been the general reaction among other members of the 101st over the past 15, 20 minutes? I assume you've spoken with a lot of those soldiers.
I have talked to at least 24 of the young soldiers, and they are reacting superbly. I have seen the officers that are here and moving around are doing exactly what you would expect of them. There's a strong sense of urgency, but no sense of panic whatsoever. As a matter of fact, in the last 5 minutes, things have calmed down measurably. From my perspective, the battalion intelligence, the brigade intelligence officer is now running the show. And from my perspective of having been in the service, it seems like he is doing everything he is supposed to be doing.
Did you get the sense, Jim, that there was significant, what they call force protection, security surrounding those two camps, Camp New Jersey, Camp Pennsylvania in Kuwait, which is not far, of course, from the Iraqi border?
Right. Until now, I would have said that we had substantial security. We still do. There is at least a full infantry company manning the perimeter of this camp at all times. But there is traffic in and out in terms of trucks and buses and contractors coming in. So it's not a foolproof system, but from all appearances, looking from the outside in, it seemed like a very damn good security system.
Jim Lacey, take care of yourself over there. We'll be checking back with you. Thanks for giving us that information. Jim Lacey from our sister publication, Time Magazine. Sad words about, 8 U.S. soldiers injured, 6 of them seriously, in a grenade attack at this base, which houses the 101st Airborne, at least elements of the 101st Airborne, originally based at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Jim Lacey of Time Magazine, thanks very much. Very quickly, we'll give you the results of our web question of the day. The question is, when it comes to the strike on Iraq, whom do you side with most, President Bush or the anti-war protesters? The results so far, 72% say President Bush, 28% say the protesters. Thanks very much for spending some time with us. Well, we're having continuing coverage, of course, on the strike on Iraq. I'm Wolf Blitzer in Kuwait City. I'll be back throughout the night. Let's get to Heidi Collins in Atlanta for a quick check of all the late-breaking developments.
Thank you, Wolf. Hello, I am Heidi Collins at CNN Center in Atlanta. Here's what's happening at this hour in the strike on Iraq. Coalition troops advancing from Kuwait are now halfway to Baghdad. Units of the 3rd Infantry Division have captured a key bridge over the River Euphrates in the town of Nasiriyah, northwest of Basra. Just outside the town, coalition military traffic was so heavy that it sometimes came to a complete standstill. Marines around Basra have been destroying abandoned Iraqi armored vehicles. The Marines have now handed over responsibility for the area to the British Army. British troops are securing the Marines' rear and right flank. More explosions shook Baghdad tonight as residents braced for the possibility of another round of heavy air and military strikes. Some of the smoke may have been caused by Iraqi troops setting fire to oil-filled trenches. Central Command says between 1,000 and 2,000 Iraqi soldiers have been taken prisoner by coalition forces. Thousands more are reported to have abandoned their positions and gone home. A complete Iraqi division is among the Iraqi units to have surrendered. Well, those are the headlines making news this hour. You're watching CNN, the most trusted name in news.
Reminds me often, this is the easy part, the relatively easy part. Getting from the border to this point, it gets a lot nastier, or might, in the days ahead. Wolf?
There's no doubt this is a breathtaking story, Aaron. The developments simply are coming in, not necessarily by the hour, almost by the minute. Let's go to CNN's Carl Penhall. He's in northern Kuwait right now with yet another dramatic development. Carl?
Yes, Wolf, just a few moments ago, the all clear was sounded. That was following an attack by an Iraqi missile on one of the U.S. base camps here close to the border with Iraq, but on the Kuwaiti side. I heard, I was asleep at the time, but we were awoken in the tent where I'm sleeping by the blast of 2 Patriot missiles as they went up into the atmosphere, U.S. Patriot missiles that went into the atmosphere to intercept an incoming Iraqi missile. Commanders here at the base have told me that that Iraqi missile was successfully destroyed in the atmosphere, and following an alert, a chemical alert that lasted some 40 or 50 minutes, the all clear has sounded and there has been no detection of any chemicals present. Commanders haven't been able to say yet what type of missile it was, First indications were that it may have been a Scud. They're now revising that and trying to analyze what kind of missile it may have been. But certainly, Wolf, that missile didn't impact the ground. It was successfully intercepted by the Patriot missiles. Wolf.
The destruction of Saddam Hussein's war machine continues on the ground and from the air. Welcome back to our continuing coverage. I'm Wolf Blitzer reporting live tonight from Kuwait City, not far away from here. At a U.S. military base in the northern part of Kuwait, there was a grenade attack against soldiers from the U.S. Army's 101st Airborne Division. 10 U.S. soldiers have been injured. 6 of them were told seriously. 2 men were seen running away after grenades were lobbed into 2 tents. A serious development here that we're following, a development that's causing great concern among U.S. military personnel. Let's get the latest now from Richard Blystone, CNN's Richard Blystone. He's standing by here in Kuwait. He has some more information. Richard?
Well, what I have to tell you is not much advance. In fact, it's even a retreat on what you've already had from the Pentagon and from Carl Penhall. But I can tell you this. The statement has just been released by the military spokesman here. He says 13 were wounded in these attacks at Camp Pennsylvania tonight, and all of them have been evacuated to a field hospital. That's about all there is on that. The attack was carried out, he says, with small arms and grenades, and there are really no further details other than the area has been secured. They have rapid reaction teams there, and the incident is being investigated.
1 second. I just want to go to Baghdad and show our viewers these live pictures we're getting in. We're beginning to hear not only sirens, but shots being fired in Baghdad. Once again, familiar scene. Let's listen in briefly and see what we can detect.
We can vaguely hear the sirens. We could hear some explosions, probably anti-aircraft going up. We didn't see much tracer. This is a night scope shot. For those of you not familiar, that's why it's green into the night. It's still about an hour and a half before daylight. That'll wake you up.
You can hear that explosion.
Yeah, that'll wake you up.
And I think, Aaron, we should point out to our viewers, these cameras that we have around Baghdad are fixed. They're in fixed positions, and they're just looking out. These explosions could be occurring out of sight, obviously, from these cameras.
But what we don't see yet, we don't see a lot of, from these 2 locations. We may have one other we can throw up at some point, but we don't see yet in the sky lots of tracer, or at this point, any anti-aircraft fire going up, but we certainly a moment ago, 15 seconds ago, heard a loud explosion and some shots being fired and the sirens going off, coming up on 4:30 on a Sunday morning in Baghdad.
You know, it's also interesting, Aaron, you could barely hear it, but I could definitely hear the call to prayer in Baghdad, even as this explosion, even as this thud developed. That if you're listening behind me here in Kuwait City, the call to prayer has just begun as well.
So there's and we'll listen to this, but there's a kind of mix of audio here. You can hear in Wolf's mic the call to prayer in Kuwait City, another explosion. is an odd mixture of sounds, the wailing sirens and the call to prayer and the explosions going off, some shots being fired.
We had been bracing for this continued air campaign to unfold over Baghdad. U.S. officials, military personnel saying the shock and awe was only just beginning. Another day or two of intensive bombing campaigns, not only in the Iraqi capital, but throughout much of Iraq, including Republican Guard positions, anti-aircraft positions, as well as locations where the U.S. suspects the Iraqis may still be concealing weapons of mass destruction.
Don't know if that's what this is. It may turn out to be that. It may be a false signal that the Iraqis, some false pulsing in the Iraqi radar system that they picked up that's causing, but we've heard now 3 fairly significant explosions, even as to these 2 shots that we have, the night scope shot on the left and the just standard shot on the right. We don't see much going on. Wolf, it was just, I don't know, 10 minutes ago or so in the program that we saw these clips from Iraqi television of people going about their normal business, going to the grocery, picking up some eggs and some food. This is what they're living under, this constant anxiety. They know it's coming. They don't know when it's coming.
Especially today, Aaron, because normally over these years the airstrikes occur at night. But earlier today in daylight there was a significant U.S. airstrike that must have certainly unnerved those 5 million people in Baghdad because those were the hours, the daylight hours, when they did go out, do their shopping, try to get some essential chores done, and then they would go back to their homes, and many of them would go to their shelters bracing for this kind of assault at night.
So it's just a little bit unclear now exactly what's playing out early morning, Sunday morning in Baghdad. If we can, please, let's keep an eye on that as we try at the same time to update the other major strain of the story in the last few hours, which was this grenade and small arms attack, intruders at Camp Pennsylvania, one of the American camps, the 101st Airborne up at Camp Pennsylvania. Charles Glover is with the Financial Times. He's embedded in that unit. We have him, I assume, guys, this is on the phone. Charles, have you been able to figure out much?
Yes, they've taken they detained a U.S. soldier in connection with the attack, and he's being questioned now. We're being asked not to report many of.
I'm sorry. I want you.
They've detained a U.S.
A U.S. soldier.
Yes.
Okay.
A U.S. soldier. That's all that we can release right now. But he was detained shortly after the attack. There have been a number of suspects that have been detained and questioned. One of the suspects is a U.S. soldier who's being questioned right now. Again, there's not much that we can release about that.
Okay.
Although we know a little more.
All right. Well, let me ask you. I'm sorry. Let me ask you this. Just this is one of those awkward situations where I know you know some things that you can't report, and I don't want to walk you into a corner.
Absolutely.
We are talking about a single individual. Is that correct?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay.
There are search patrols fanning out across the camp, but at the moment, all we can report is that there is a single individual that's being questioned in connection with this.
It does. I will tell you, take your breath away under the circumstances. Can you tell us anything about the condition of the 13 people who were hurt in this attack, or whatever it was? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
2 of them were shot. The rest had fragmentation wounds. and I think all of them had fragmentation wounds. Several, I don't think all 13, but several of them were evacuated earlier tonight, and are being treated. We've had reports that 4 of them have been seriously injured.
And just one more question, if I may, before I let you go. Is it still your understanding that this incident took place in a headquarters tent where officers were?
Yes.
That's still your understanding?
Yes, it was an attack targeting the leadership of the 1st Brigade of the 101st. There were 3 loud explosions in succession, grenades being thrown into the tents, and then there was small arms fire after that. A lot of confusion in the first initial minutes. People took shelter in bunkers thinking they were under a missile attack, and it turned out that actually the attacker was inside the camp.
Was it?
And so there was a lot of confusion.
Charles, was it?
But the soldiers took.
I'm sorry.
The soldiers took control of the situation very, very quickly and dealt with it very, very professionally.
There is this, the problem here sometimes is the satellite delay. Was it chaotic? Was there, I don't want to use the word panic, was it just chaotic there while this was going on?
In the first minute or two, there was a lot of confusion because nobody knew. People were used to having missile alerts where we'd go to bunkers and sirens would go off and we'd take cover from what we thought were missile attacks. We heard the explosions. We didn't hear any sirens initially. Everybody ran to the bunkers thinking we were under a missile attack. And then gradually it became clear that there was something else going on. But the soldiers took control of the situation quite efficiently and brought order. And everybody. Again, we're being asked not to release operational details. So.
Okay. I know, Wolf, you want to jump in here. Just let me underscore what is, at this moment, the lead to this terrible incident at Camp Pennsylvania. Charles Glover reporting that an American soldier is being questioned in connection with this incident where grenades and small arms fire were directed at a command tent, a place where officers of the 101st were sleeping or at work. Wolf, it takes your breath away, doesn't it?
It certainly does. It certainly does. And Charles, if you can't answer this question, don't answer it. I'll just ask the question. Is the suspicion that this American soldier may have been responsible for this grenade and small arms attack, or that this soldier may have done something to facilitate it, whether directly or indirectly?
I'm going to have to pass on that one. I think we were being asked to be very careful with what we say. Until he's questioned and until they release the information officially,
okay.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to pass on that one. Sorry.
I mean, we're trying to do some real-time reporting, and you're under the most difficult of circumstances, and we appreciate all of that. Again, we have 13 people have been hurt, 2 by small arms fire, others by grenade fragments. As Charles reported, 1 soldier, American soldier, is being questioned, and as Wolf correctly, I think, and smartly in this case points out, there's some question about whether that is direct involvement or somehow facilitated it or was derelict in some way. There's lots of possibilities. But in any case, given how we thought of it, Wolf and Charles, from this end, it's quite a different lead on the story to report here.
It's a story that's going to sort out in the next hours. I'm sure we're going to get a lot more information. We'll just have to be patient and wait for that information. We did hear from Jim Lacey earlier from Time Magazine, the embedded Time Magazine reporter who was only 20 yards away. He did report to us that 2 individuals were seen running away from that tent. We have obviously no other information. Let's just be patient and get all the latest as it becomes available. The bottom line, though, is 13 U.S. soldiers, we believe, have been injured.
Being the photographer. Rick, what is that horn? Sometimes we hear it. Can you describe what that means?
Again, if you hear that humming noise,
yes,
the hydraulics that power the turret turns. I've got a heavy fire. It's all outgoing, by the way. It's on vehicles on both sides of it. And the LAV we're sitting in is also firing just a moment ago when you left me. Now I'm seeing sparks and explosions off in the distance as the rounds strike targets. Heavy firing from these light armored vehicles on both sides of it. From our vehicle itself, although it's not firing at the moment. But again, if you hear that noise, that's the turret turning as they scan, looking for targets with their night vision equipment.
So they've obviously identified some targets, and thankfully, as you say, you believe all the fire is outgoing, nothing incoming?
Oh, there's a lot going on there. Well, rather than having me summarize it, we're going to bring you the very latest in the war developments. Fox News correspondent Major Garrett joins us live at the Pentagon. Major?
Well, Tony, developments are coming at a breathtaking pace. Not all of them are good. We can tell you here at the Pentagon a general assessment of the war campaign at this hour. Let's talk to a senior military official here who says a long, painful road lies ahead, and the U.S. military and its coalition partners understand that there are 6 Iraqi divisions, all of them Republican Guard, that have yet to be engaged. 5 in and around Baghdad, 1 north of Baghdad. And because they have yet to be engaged, they expect resistance from the Iraqis to stiffen, and there has been stiffening resistance today in the cities of Nasiriyah and Najaf. Najaf is just about 100 miles south and west of Baghdad. It is the northernmost penetration so far of coalition forces, and there has also been scattered resistance in 2 other cities that the coalition had thought had been largely suppressed, Qasr and Basra. Also, Tony, I want to bring our viewers up to date on what has happened, and especially of those in our Fox News Channel viewing audience who are just joining us. This military has confirmed after viewing videotape aired by Al Jazeera television, not by the Fox News Channel, that there are some U.S. military personnel as prisoners of war captured apparently by the Iraqis. They identified a unit at which they were attached to. The U.S. military is investigating the authenticity of that. But we had some U.S. military personnel in our Fox booth here at the Pentagon because they were very eager to take a look at this video just as soon as they could. They watched it with us. They saw what they described as interrogations of these U.S. military personnel in grotesque violation of the Geneva Convention, Article 13, which says no prisoner of war are supposed to be subjected to any form of insult or public curiosity. I can also tell you, Tony, these senior military officials who were in the booth also watched another portion of that videotape, monstrously gruesome, of dead U.S. military personnel, apparently shot through the head, execution style. And I can tell you the atmosphere in this booth as these senior military personnel reviewed the videotape for the very first time, nothing but silence, clenched jaw, outrage. They're investigating that as well. They're trying to find out the disposition of these U.S. military personnel. They identified a specific company. The Pentagon is investigating to see if they can authenticate that. It would have been a maintenance company, which would have been a follow-on force. It was described that these prisoners were taken near the Iraqi city of Nasiriyah, which the coalition forces have long since moved beyond. This would have been a follow-on force, much less protected militarily speaking than the lead armored divisions, so they might have been more easily engaged by Iraqis who had once told coalition forces they were surrendering, but then maybe took up arms and used some sort of maneuver to capture them. All of that is being thoroughly investigated here at the Pentagon. But I would say again, as I said at the top, from a senior military official, a long, painful road ahead. 6 Republican Guard divisions yet to be engaged, 5 of them encircling Baghdad, 1 north of Baghdad, stiffening resistance in the key cities of Najaf, just 100 miles southwest of Baghdad, also Nasiriyah, and remaining pockets of resistance in Qasr and Basra as well. Tony, back to you.
All right, Major, just a couple of other notes along those lines. Al Jazeera carried that controversial tape, and Al Jazeera spokesman Jihad Balout has the following to say, quote, "I'm not aware that doing our job as journalists is a violation of the Geneva Convention. However, I am not an international law specialist." He continues, "We plan to continue to cover this dramatic event as we plan to continue to cover all sides of the story." One should note that Al Jazeera's coverage has been very light on reporting of Allied victories and rather heavy on Iraqi propaganda, including an incident today where Iraqi forces were shooting into the Tigris River, claiming to be chasing after Allied airmen they said had ejected over Baghdad. The curiosity there is that one would have had to believe that the airmen ejected, landed, and then burst into fire because there were flames along the banks of the Tigris River. Also, for the edification of Mr. Balout and anybody else who may be listening, I will read to you the relevant portions of Article 13 of the Geneva Convention. Prisoners of war must at all times be humanely treated. Any unlawful act or omission by the detaining power causing death or seriously endangering the health of a prisoner of war in its custody is prohibited and will be regarded as a serious breach of the present convention. In particular, no prisoner of war may be subjected to physical mutilation or to medical or scientific experiments of any kind which are not justified by the medical, dental, or hospital treatment of the prisoner concerned and carried out in his interest. It continues, a more relevant portion. Likewise, prisoners of war must at all times be protected, particularly against acts of violence or intimidation and against insults and public curiosity. Measures of reprisal against prisoners of war are prohibited. So that is what the Geneva Convention has to say about this. Now joining us, we have joining us a former POW from the Gulf War, Jeffrey Zahn. You may recall Mr. Zahn at one point was paraded before cameras by Iraqi officials. Mr. Zahn, I very much appreciate your joining us. Talk a little bit about the way, from your experience, Iraqis treat prisoners of war.
Well, it's important to note that it very much depends on who you're with. There'll be quite a shock from going from fighting in the field or putting things together in the field to being a POW. And it's very important that we shout out pretty loud that this is a war crime and they'll be held accountable.
Again, obviously, the Iraqis look at this much differently. There are reports, or at least there's a suspicion, that some of the U.S. crew there was, in fact, executed by Iraqi officials. We can't say that with any certainty at this point. But again, once one falls into the custody of the Iraqis, how do they treat you?
Again, it varies. The Army actually, when they were first captured, they were probably treated pretty roughly. The folks capturing them, maybe with some reason, were probably nearly as scared as they are. Then they're transported northward, and it depends who you're turned over to. The secret police are going to not treat you well. I don't want to get into that because there are families watching. The Army, on the other hand, with us, when I was held by the Iraqi Army, the treatment was actually fairly standard. There was only a week that I was held by them. But that was basically in line with the Geneva Convention. So it's important to say that folks are going to be held accountable and hold them accountable so that we might be able to affect the way they're treated.
Did you get any sense that promises to that effect during the first Gulf War may in fact have saved lives of American prisoners?
Well, I know that at the end they were going to mess with us. They were going to hold us. They were going to try and use us for leverage, and that Norman Schwarzkopf stepped on somebody's throat and said spit, and we came out quite quickly.
All right, so it's very important again, and I know I'm reiterating what you've said already, but there ought to be, at least in your opinion, repeated public statements on the part of military officials that they're simply not going to take this.
That's correct. I mean, first of all, the biggest thing is to persevere in the conflict. I mean, we're moving to Baghdad very quickly, and actually some of this, we should expect POWs, and to some extent, this is actually a good sign because it means we're not defending everywhere. It means we're concentrating on the important parts, and maybe there will be there will be casualties like this along the way, but in the big picture, we're doing the right thing. And the best thing we can do for these guys is win the conflict. They'll be home quickly.
In other words, don't back off. Now, once in custody, did they tend to separate prisoners so that people are completely isolated?
Yeah, and for me, that was actually the worst. That was actually the worst part of being a POW. And I would think, fortunately for these people, I was held for a month and a half. Fortunately for these people, I don't think it'll be quite that long.
Now, you mentioned that the Army actually was more humane than the secret police. Is that because, in your sense, there was an expectation on the part of the Army that if they treated you too roughly, they, members of the military, were going to suffer the consequences, not at the hands of Saddam Hussein, but then of Norman Schwarzkopf and the U.S. forces, today George W. Bush and the Allied forces?
My sense actually was that they were professional. They know what we're like. I mean, in the streets of Baghdad, when I was held, I could hear people having calm conversations, even as...
It's been a night like tonight. A warm tropical breeze is blowing out onto the ocean. It's been 28 days, a full lunar cycle since...
Not actually mentioned the humanitarian effort so far. You outlined how that is going. There are reports of Iraqi civilians inside Iraq really beginning to get hungry, and what the latest is on the movement of the massive supply. And are you anxious to get that moving quicker?
We have not seen any accurate reports or intelligence that suggest there's a humanitarian crisis in Iraq. We have seen some reporters and pictures of people hoping to get water or hoping to get food as food has been brought in. Whether that's anecdotal or representative of something is unclear. I suspect it's more anecdotal. There's no question there are people who are hungry and want water. We do know that water mains were broken and that there was some fraction of the people down south who did not have good water for a period. We also know that the Brits have got a water line going in and people are bringing truckloads of water in, and one would hope that the people who are under our areas of responsibility are in fact receiving what they should receive. We have said repeatedly that the forces going in brought food with them, they brought medicine, and they brought water. So the people in those areas presumably are okay. We also know that the Iraqi people overall, we were told and estimated, have something like anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks of food that had been pre-distributed in doubled up rations for the period preceding maybe a couple of months, and that therefore the likelihood that they would run out seems not to be great. But I did mention the Galahad, Sir Galahad had arrived, and it had, I don't know, what, 200 or 300 tons of, 200 tons of food or something.
Yeah, and, over 300 almost.
And there are other major efforts that are coming forward.
The World Food Program, I'm sorry?
Did you want to add to that?
I was going to second. The World Food Program, as of 2 days ago on the 26th of March, says that the food distribution system that's been running there, the Oil for Food, is still partially intact in southern Iraq. And while some of the rations being delivered are incomplete, they're still delivering rations to those folks that aren't not affected by the fighting. And they said it's going to be close to the end of April before anybody runs out of food. By that time, we're already providing some of that food, particularly in the areas where they're struggling.
Sure. When you came out here last Friday, you described the activity that was taking place almost as a psychological operation, in terms of the point being to impress on the Iraqis a certain idea or attitude, and that perhaps thereby the regime would tip. Yesterday, when you described the activity, it was in a much more traditional military sense, about the rings around Baghdad and the need to penetrate those. Have you shifted your thinking in the past week from emphasizing more of a psychological operation to more of a traditional military operation?
I don't think so. From the outset, our preference would have been that the diplomacy would work. Our second preference would have been that the ultimatum would have worked. He would have left the country. When we came out at the beginning of the ground and the air war, our preference would have been that the Iraqi forces would have thrown in the towel and said, fair enough, or that Saddam Hussein would have left. That remains the case. The conflict has to be pursued. It's going to end, and it's going to end with Saddam Hussein losing. And my hope from then and today remains that it will be done with a the least loss of life that's possible.
Secretary,
and I don't know that there's any, I don't feel that there's any change in my perspective. Yes.
Mr. Secretary, for someone who's always advocating private channels of diplomacy, I'd like to go back to your statement about Syria and Iran. To be very precise, what message are you sending the governments of Syria and Iran from this podium? Are the rules of the road for this conflict to other countries the same as they are for the war on terrorism? You are with us or against us, which is the president's message. Is that what you are saying here, your message? And for General Myers, if you don't know the mood of the Iraqi people yet, and you don't deem it important to know the mood of the Iraqi people, what are the military challenges of operating in the city of Baghdad of 5 million people if you don't think it's important to know the mood of the people before you get there?
With respect to the first questions, the message is that General Franks has forces in that country. Some are losing their lives. Coalition forces are. We don't like having our forces lose their lives. We don't want the conflict prolonged, and we don't want neighboring countries or anyone else for that matter to be in there assisting the Iraqi forces. And specifically with respect to Syria, I pointed out that we have seen military supplies and materials and equipment crossing the border, and we'd like it to stop. And to the extent it keeps on, we have to consider it a hostile act.
Good afternoon and good evening from this part of the world. It's just after 10 p.m. in Baghdad, as well as here in Kuwait City, just after 2 p.m. on the East Coast over at the White House, where the news is being made this Friday, March 28th. I'm Wolf Blitzer reporting live tonight from Kuwait City. Coming up this hour, breaking news from the State Department based on reports of a busted Iraqi plot to attack U.S. interests. Our Andrea Koppel will have that also ahead. Striking the telecommunications center. It's the telephone hub of Iraq, and now it's partly rubble this afternoon. How will it affect Saddam Hussein's strategy?
From the CNN studios in Washington, I'm Judy Woodruff. We're expecting the president to speak to veterans in the East Room this hour. CNN will take you there. Also this hour, aid to the South, food and water now in the city of Qasr. We are live with the humanitarian effort.
And from CNN's World Headquarters in Atlanta, I'm Miles O'Brien. Also this hour, the tale of two strategies. Do coalition forces take out the Republican Guard? Or is the paramilitary group, the Fedayeen, the real target? We'll try to get some answers for you from our staff of generals here at CNN. Those stories and much more straight ahead, but for now, let's go back to Wolf in Kuwait City.
Thanks very much, Miles. Let's take a look at Iraq right now, region by region. Bombing Baghdad, U.S.-led forces unleashed one of the heaviest bombardments on Baghdad last night, sending clouds of smoke rising hundreds of feet into the air. One of the most important targets, a telecommunications center. Reports differ on what kind of bombs those were. The Central Command now is denying earlier talk by Pentagon sources that they were so-called bunker busters, the same kind of bombs used in the administration's war on terrorism in Afghanistan. Let's go to the north now, into the city of Mosul. For the second day in a row, coalition airstrikes targeted Iraqi troops along a ridge near a Kurdish-controlled area. Mosul is just 100 miles from the key oil city of Kirkuk.
شاهدنا هذه الصور التي تمثل نزوح أعداد كبيرة من المدنيين العراقيين وأوجه المعاناة التي يواجهون.
And in the south today, Iraqi militia fired machine guns and mortars at hundreds of Basra residents trying to flee the northern half of the city to the British-held southern half. Northern Basra is controlled by members of Saddam Hussein's militia members who have been firing upon coalition forces now for several days. We have a lot of news coming up and a lot of analysis. Let's immediately go to CNN's Miles O'Brien in Atlanta. He has more. Miles?
Thank you very much, Wolf. We're following some reports that are coming out of Baghdad now about an explosion in a neighborhood in the northwest section of that city, the Shula neighborhood. We have General Don Shepard with us, and we'd like to, first of all, using some of our satellite imagery from earthviewer.com, Digital Globe, we're going to zoom down on this Shula neighborhood. There you can see it right here in this portion of Baghdad. That's the center of the city where the presidential palaces are, so a little bit of distance there. Let's zoom in and I'll give you a sense of what this neighborhood is all about. Don Shepard, the reports are sketchy to say the least, but as we zoom in on this, we know there are reports of more than 50 dead and an explosion. Beyond that, what do we know?
Not much, Miles. This is the early stages. The reports that we have seen are it's a neighborhood with a market where people were shopping. There are no military targets in the area. According to the Iraqis, they don't know why it would be struck. Now, again, if this is United States errant bombs, it would be errant bombs because they would not intentionally strike a target such as this. The reports that we have seen early, the pictures are very heart-rending. Brings back to mind the Ala Maria bunker that took place during the Gulf War. This is something that the U.S. really tries to avoid, collateral damage and striking of civilians.
All right, the Shula neighborhood. Stay tuned for more information on that. It is something that is always tried to be avoided, but nevertheless, unfortunately, these things do happen in air campaigns.
They do indeed. Sometimes it's an errant bomb, sometimes it's a missile that's been struck. We're just going to have to wait and see. And